Welcome back. If you've been watching my channel long enough, you know I like my occasional weep slop, one of which is Attack on Titan, and one of my earliest videos was a theory about Attack on Titan's one-shot and the original direction of how the Titans worked. Nearing the end of the manga in 2021, it became controversial. A particular crowd of people who often have the same political affiliation and views began calling Attack on Titan anti-Semitic or fascist. It didn't take long for YouTube's cesspool of that exact same crowd, BreadTube, to start doing the same. When it comes to BreadTube videos, they're essays, a thesis almost, that consist of pretending they're saying something of substance while saying next to nothing at all. A monolith of the same shit takes. Each video, no matter the topic, follows the same exact beats. Just like when the anti-SJW content became stale and old. It's as if they all share the same bulletin board of points and terms they have to brainlessly throw around, that they have to include in the video. It is inevitable that they spit out a buzzword salad of the same buzzwords. Once you've seen one or two videos, you've pretty much seen them all, and it's something I've wanted to explore just a little bit. As a fan of Attack on Titan, I'd like to explore that avenue specifically, and just how exactly these people are wrong. This should go without saying, but this video is for those who have seen Attack on Titan, hopefully in its entirety, so you can understand what's being discussed, as there will be spoilers. I came across a video that I think represents everything wrong with the accusation and the people backing it, titled Attack on Titan and the Road to Fascism, made by a channel called Lost Futures, and it only shot to popularity because a BreadTuber who has been accusing Attack on Titan and its author Isayama of being fascist, FD Signifier.
Attack on Titan is an anime show based off a manga that started in 2009. And it's not your usual Dragon Ball or Pokemon or something maybe more puerile. It's the closest thing that I think anime has gotten to Game of Thrones, with an intense story, with lots of characters, very dark, complex themes around racism and politics, war, etc., and some insane plot twists. For years, it was looking to be my favorite anime/manga of all time until it got to its last arc. So yeah, it's a lot like Game of Thrones, actually. In the last arc of the story, Eren Yeager, the story's protagonist, goes from being a plucky, typical shonen protagonist with lots of angst and whining and maybe some awesome moments of friendship and perseverance and selflessness, and he turns into a cold and calculated genocidal fascist with abs. It's a relatively startling character shift that I was initially on board with just out of curiosity and hope that the writer, who had shown some concerning inclinations over the years to be low-key into fascism, that maybe none of that was true and that he would bring it all together in a way that made sense. He did not.
Promoted the video in one of his videos where he seethed about Attack on Titan. Now that was a brief clip, but if you want more to get a greater understanding of just how horrendous his take on Attack on Titan and Eren really is, there is plenty for you to watch. FD refers to Attack on Titan and Eren as a punching bag on his channel for a reason. He's been crying about it any chance he can get. If there is even a slightest possibility that he can use mental gymnastics to connect Eren to some other topic he's talking about, I assure you he will gladly do it, resulting in several videos where he too repeats the same talking points again and again, with the occasional change in wording or a different video he points people in the direction of, only for that video to do the same thing as the rest. What I find most interesting about FD Signifier is not really his opinion on Eren Yeager, but more so the contrast when he talks about Eren versus him talking about Killmonger, specifically the movie Black Panther's interpretation of Killmonger. Two characters who are very similar. Both are oppressed, traumatized individuals, particularly as children, who lose their parents early on. Eric, or Killmonger, finding his father dead, and with Eren watching his mother die and later eating his father. And both of them are molded into what they become from their trauma and pain. They both want to end the oppression of their people, and both resort to imperialist tactics to do so, eventually leading up to genocide. The difference being that Killmonger was stopped before his global destruction could be done. Both of these characters also became a crying mess when trying to rationalize their actions right before they died, such as Killmonger practically confessing that he was hurting the world because it hurt him and took everything away from him.
I don't need a suit to kill you. The reign is over. You sat up here safe and protected.
You want to see us become just like the people you hate so much.
Divide and conquer the land as they did. Nah, I learned from my enemies. Beat them at their own game.
You have become them. You will destroy the world, Wakanda included.
The world took everything away from me. Everything I ever loved. But I'm gonna make sure we're even. I'm gonna track down anyone who would even think about being loyal to you. and I'm gonna put their ass in the dirt right next to Zuri.
Both of them talk about killing constantly. Killmonger's even marked his body for every kill he's had, but I guess he's not edgy. Their fathers promised to both of them that they would show them things in relation to where they come from, only for them to be unable to fulfill that promise because they died before they could. Killmonger's dad was killed by his brother, Killmonger's uncle, and Aaron's dad, who was eaten by him to transfer the power of the Attack Titan and the Founding Titan before he could be shown the basement secret. Both Aaron and Killmonger go from being stoic and badass to crying and vice versa. They both have their rise to power moments shirtless. And yet FD Signifier particularly mocks Aaron for being stoic and badass and Sigma and all this other stuff, but none of that applies to Killmonger, apparently. And for another comparison, just as a cherry on top, both of them come from a people that were bestowed fantastical powers seemingly from the heavens. The meteor that blessed the Wakandans with vibranium, and the possibly alien life form that is the source of all living matter that Ymir stumbled upon. The vibranium and the herb that came from the vibranium, and Ymir's bloodline and the Eldians, both of those provide their people with their own version of the afterlife. Those who eat of the herb go to the ancestral plane, whereas the Eldians, they are connected to and go to the paths, and they can be summoned at will at any point by the founder. Despite these similarities, FD Signifier avoids approaching it from Aaron's perspective to understand why Aaron is the way he is, why he has the view he does, and why he became radicalized, simply mocking Aaron with edgelord and Sigma, crying that it's abhorrent that the story has such an ending. When talking about Killmonger, he doesn't call him a fascist, and he doesn't call him an edgelord either. No, he's more than happy to approach it from an understanding angle. He says that Killmonger is misunderstood, that he's a fantasy representation of black radical resistance imagery. He describes him as pretty awesome.
In the movie The Rock, Brigadier General Francis Hummel is played by Ed Harris, and he has created a splinter cell terrorist group of ex-American soldiers who were betrayed by the American government and are trying to settle the score. This type of villain became very popular and palatable in the 90s because that's when the effects of late capitalism and neoliberalism started to be more palatable and affecting to the American people. People began to understand that the real villains were a lot of these systems failing American citizens and creating the conditions to make villains, and thus pure evildoers can't quite cut it anymore for American media consumers. And so there was a change to make villains who are right in their reasoning but wrong in their execution, which makes them more compelling but also has some problematic messaging. These types of villains are meant to relate to people's understandable dissatisfaction with the way the world is, but it also wants to promote the opinion that drastic action to address these injustices is just the wrong way to do it. So it always creates villains who take the most extreme measures possible to address legitimate social injustices so that people don't feel too comfortable with the idea that radical action might be necessary for change. And this brings us back to the first villain I really want to talk about, Eric Killmonger.
These items aren't for sale.
How do you think your ancestors got these? They paid a fair price? Or did they take it like they took everything else?
Is this your king? Huh? Is this your king?
Few black villains of recent memory are as iconic and controversial and probably misunderstood than Black Panther's Killmonger. His hair became a plague in video games for nearly a decade because everyone wanted a character that had the same energy he had. He's a fan favorite to the point that his cameo in the second movie made theaters erupt, even though he was there at a low point in the film. He's so beloved and compelling that there's still a ton of debate as to whether or not he's actually a bad guy at all in the movie, which the answer is yes, but I talked about this in my Black Panther video a little while back, but I'm happy that I get to revisit it because I feel like I need to clarify and explore those thoughts a bit more because I have new versions of them that I want to present to you. So first and foremost, Killmonger is a black villain in one of the blackest movies ever made by a variety of measures. Black Panther was a damn near all black production and it barely had any white actors in it, although the ones that are in there are very problematic. Again, watch the video on it from a few years ago, but despite its problems, its core themes deal with tons of concepts around the black experience, which wouldn't have been possible without their version of Killmonger. Killmonger is very much a fantasy representation of black radical resistance imagery. He's like an imaginary combination of Malcolm X, Bass Reeves, and James Bond, and he's pretty awesome. His introductory scene in the museum is iconic because it's him doing something that black people wish they could do on the regular. Tell white people the truth and get away with it. The way he looks, his hair included, is intrinsic to the sense of rebellion that he carries not just toward Wakanda, but to the world as a whole. He's dressed in a way to draw attention to the fact that he's not trying to conform as a black person. When he's accosted for looking out of place in this museum, as black people often are, even when we are dressed to conform to the environment, he engages calmly and eagerly as if the conversation is nothing special to him, versus the congenial way that black people learn to engage with white people in public as a method of protection. And then he, in the same eager and calm tone, corrects her lack of knowledge about this artifact and then adds on to it some real knowledge about the truth of the whole situation before orchestrating his heist and making out like a bandit. This is the core of Killmonger's appeal as a character and villain. He has the power, courage, skill, and expertise to pursue black liberation in a way that's only possible in movies and comic books, and we love him for that.
His tone and attitude is entirely different with Killmonger, and the why becomes obvious when you consider that FD Signifier specifically associates white men with loving edgelords, and him constantly calling Aaron an edgelord. That said, this video isn't about him. I might end up exploring more of that later though. You guys let me know if you find that fascinating. I wanted to give some context as to who makes these videos and who they attract, and who specifically promoted this video to the attention that it ended up getting. Returning to Lost Future's video on Attack on Titan, I'm going to be skipping the first 34 minutes. Not because I'm trying to give you a dishonest take on the video. In fact, if you want to watch the first 34 and then come back here, that's fine. But rather because of Lost Futures, who I'm going to mostly refer to as LF. He spends the first 34 minutes not even talking about Attack on Titan. Instead, he talks about Japan's history of war crimes, imperialism, and fascism. Only a small portion of which ends up being remotely relevant because in a shocking twist, the story about war and violence by a Japanese author has parallels to real-life war and violence that Japan was involved in. Now, who would have thought? In typical BreadTube fashion, the video needs to be some dragged-out thesis or essay with copy and paste info before he actually addresses the main topic, so I won't be covering all of that. It isn't on me that he struggles with bringing up his parallels whenever they're relevant. My sole focus is what he has to say when he actually talks about Attack on Titan. I'm not going to pointlessly drag out my video because he sucks at unpacking the important info to convey his points in the moment, or risking getting a copyright strike. I've been there and done that multiple times. Now, just before he gets into talking about Attack on Titan, LF says something very interesting that I do think is worth showing you.
Surprise, surprise, Attack on Titan features most of these crimes. And it also has aspects of the current far-right movement, and that's how they're adopting it, because it speaks to the alternative right and those online. It's time to shred Attack on Titans. I don't know, we're gonna keep that in.
Aside from his laugh sounding like Bumblebee's radio from the first Transformers movie, he claims that Attack on Titan has aspects of the current far-right movement, that they're adopting Attack on Titan, and that it speaks to the alt-right. He made sure to throw those buzzwords in, but doesn't provide a lick of evidence for that. I wonder, maybe that's a hint of bias ahead, a warning sign for political polarization and tribalism. Perhaps him associating it so heavily with his opposition is a bit of a hint.
Some people call Isayama a genius for creating an anti-war and anti-military manga, and there are snippets where I can see that. The earliest would be when the scouts return, and in their eyes there's just pure depression and despair. Another moment that's more deeper would be the commander of the Scouts, Edwin Smith, feeling immense guilt for sacrificing so many people for his selfish desire to know the true history. The image of him standing on a mountain of dead bodies, on a mountain of corpse, is so powerful, and it is in this moment where one can read Isayama's anti-military and anti-war message, that those on the top are selfish bastards and only attain their goals by sacrificing soldiers' lives. Edwin sacrifices his dream and goes on a final charge. And psst, hey, side note here, all of these charges kind of resemble kamikaze attacks, but we're gonna leave that. And so Edwin died, and with him many others.
LF starts by acknowledging Isayama's anti-war stance and focuses on the character Erwin, the military commander, reflecting back on the fact he has had to sacrifice lives and feeling guilt. He even showed the manga panel of Erwin asking the others, "Can you see them? All of our comrades, on which I now stand," with the panel depicting Erwin looking uncomfortable as he stands upon a mountain of his soldiers, his comrades' bodies, and his eyes closed in presumably shame. Only for LF to then proclaim all of that is undone, that the anti-war message is wrecked, because later on, a different character named Flock, a subordinate of Erwin, begs Levi to use the Titan Shifter Serum to save Erwin, with Flock professing that he views Erwin as the devil that was needed for humanity to survive. Because of Flock saying that, LF claims that Isayama himself is apparently saying that's what humanity needed.
Now, this message is wrecked by the fanatical Floch, who begs Levi to resurrect Erwin, because according to Floch, Erwin was the devil, and it was the devil that was needed for humanity to survive. Hence, in a snap of a finger, the message that was anti-military, the message that showcased the dead, the guilt, vanishes away, because Isayama here is saying, yes, Erwin was evil. Yes, he sacrificed hundreds of soldiers, but at the end of the day, that's what humanity needed. That's what humanity needed to survive. Erwin is worshipped by this man and becomes an icon after death. And so, is Attack on Titan really anti-militaristic?
There's multiple problems with this. Firstly, Flock's characterization represents radicalism, loyalty, and idolizing his superiors. Flock went from saying Erwin can save humanity to only Eren can save humanity, and LF knows this because he talks about that fact later in this video. When Eren escapes the prison, he meets up with Flock saying that Eren is the only one who can save their people. His name is literally Flock. I wonder why that is. Perhaps it has something to do with the fact that he's a follower, a blind loyalist? No, surely that's got nothing to do with it. Secondly, let's say you write a story. Character X promotes healthy eating rather than binging and snacking. You then write character Y, who comes along and has a different perspective. Character Y doesn't really care and eats whatever they want. Does that mean the message that you conveyed with character X, that people should eat healthy, is suddenly gone? Undone? Wrecked? All because a character that's less relevant has a different point of view? This is the logic LF is relying on. Flock having a radical and eager view apparently cancels out Erwin's mournful and anti-war sentiment. This implies that all characters in any story need to have the same perspective, opinions, and feelings. Otherwise, the message a character previously conveyed is inherently thrown away by the different views of a different character. Following this line of thought, later on in the story, when Marley is attacking Fort Slava, Zeke says, "Our defeat brought about this war, Reiner. Isn't war a terrible thing?" So if we're being consistent with this horribly one-dimensional view on storytelling, shouldn't Zeke's statement that is clearly anti-war override Flock's statement about Erwin, that apparently wrecks the anti-war sentiment shown with Erwin? I doubt LF even genuinely thinks like this. I think this is something he is exclusively whipping out to make this argument, a ridiculous and silly expectation that he's applying to Attack on Titan to force a conclusion. But if he does really believe in this, that that's how storytelling works, he really shouldn't be lecturing others about media literacy. Third, media apparently can't have nuance and characterization because of idiots like LF, who are unable to comprehend it. They'll just conflate the characters' opinions as inherently the author's, or argue that one character having a different view means that the other character's view is suddenly wrecked. To further disprove this notion, and because I suspect this will be a reoccurring problem moving forward, the author himself, Isayama, is on record stating that he isn't trying to tell people what is good or bad, or right or wrong. Attack on Titan is not using didactic storytelling Didactic storytelling is defined as narrative specifically designed to teach or instruct, often with a moral or ethical lesson in mind. From an interview with Isayama from 2017, there are two answers that Isayama gave that highlight his perspective. Are you heavily influenced by films? It's like this. The movie in this corner of the world has World War II era Japan as its setting, showing everything through the perspective of people from that era to illustrate what warfare is. The story starts prior to when combat began, but at some point even the main character, whose livelihood is opposite from a battlefield, also became someone who heeded the calling. Fight on. And then she was defeated by such a development. The movie doesn't explicitly answer the question of, is war a bad thing? And I think that's quite innovative. For example, in order to express the notion of discrimination as bad, it first demonstrates existing prejudices, then dives into the recognition of this mindset, then examines the opposing view. This makes the audience exclaim, whoa, and understanding the logic of it all. I'm also hoping to implement this storytelling method so that my readers can sympathize with the suffering of the characters. Contrary to the wars of human history, the victorious and the defeated within a manga is decided by its author. Can you determine what is right in the end? Up until now, what I've drawn is Aaron's perspective of those within the walls, but for the Marley arc, the same individuals appear as enemies of the Marley. Through that, the situation has evolved into how the Marley and the readers no longer know what the other side is planning. Until now, this role of someone who is unpredictable has always been given to the Titans, so by doing this, I have flipped the script on who's good or evil. Ultimately, I don't think the series passes judgment on what is right or wrong. For example, when I read Furuya Minoru's Himeneole, I knew society would consider the serial killer in the story unforgivable under social norms, but when I took into account his life and background, I still wondered, if this was his nature, then who was to blame? I even thought, is it merely a coincidence that I wasn't born as a murderer? We justify what we absolutely cannot accomplish as a flaw due to lack of effort, and there is bitterness within that. On the other hand, for a perpetrator, having the mindset of, it's not because I lack effort that I become like this, is a form of solace. We cannot deny that under such circumstances, the victim's feelings are very important. But considering the root of the issue, rather than evaluating what is right, to be influenced by various other works and their philosophies, and to truthfully illustrate my exact feelings during those moments, I think that's what Shingeki no Kyojin's ending will resemble. From the author himself, he is not looking to teach some moral lesson like a Sunday cartoon or a shonen. He is looking to show something, let the audience learn on their own from what they see. He wants to show how these characters reach these conclusions and how they become the way that they do. There's a difference. This is why you should stick to One Piece.
Isayama may not celebrate the death or valorize those who die in vain, as those who die do not die glorious deaths.
Those who die do not die glorious deaths. He says right after showing and talking about one of the most glorious moments in Attack on Titan, Erwin's charge. The fact that Erwin told them before the charge that they would all die, and they still chose to charge right behind him, is glorious. Especially because Erwin went with his men. He didn't ask them to do something he was unwilling to do, like many commanders and generals have done in war. He asked them to do something with him that would get likely all of them killed, including himself, just so that they could buy time and have a chance at saving their people. Nearly 200 soldiers charged to their death, knowing they would die, just to save lives. That is selfless, and that is glorious.
But death is not dwelled on.
Death is not dwelled on is one of the wildest things you could say about Attack on Titan of all stories. Especially after you literally just talked about Erwin dwelling on the deaths of his soldiers, which he does throughout the story multiple times. Reiner is shown constantly dwelling on what he did, especially with Marco. He became a broken shell of his former self because of it. It literally cracked his psyche into two identities so he could cope with what he had done. The soldier for Paradis and the warrior, the spy, for Marley, which is a slightly more exaggerated thing that happens to soldiers in reality. Levi and Hanji are shown both missing Erwin constantly. Levi constantly thinks about how he failed his promise to Erwin. Jean is shown mourning Marco, not once, but twice, because after that, and after the rumblings started, when they were all gathered around a fire and Yelena is calling them all out on the blood that each of them have on their hands, she brings up Marco, and that John had talked about Marco to her, to which she then brings up how Reiner and Annie had a hand in Marco's death by removing his 3D maneuvering gear, to which Reiner and Annie begin to confess to doing exactly that, with Jean showing a look of uncomfortability and an image of Marco's dead body appearing. Sasha is mourned after her death. Porco's older brother is mourned by his younger brother. Hanji is mourned after her death. Eren is shown dwelling on the fact that he knows he's going to end up killing everyone. He even profusely apologized and cried to one of his future victims. During the attack on Marley, Armin transforms into the Colossal Titan and devastates Marley's naval ships and docks with that nuclear-like explosion. He came out of the nape of his Titan to sit and dwell on the lives he had just taken. He stares down at it as we are shown the bodies and the rubble around and beneath his feet. One of the soundtracks for the show is named The Weight of Lives. One of the main things Attack on Titan's story has been praised for is that the characters are remembered and mourned constantly, long after they had died.
The military casting lives never questions. Orders are never challenged.
Orders are never challenged. I'm starting to think this guy hasn't read or watched Attack on Titan. Eren is constantly disobeying or challenging what he's told to do. His friends disobeyed orders to save his life. He's later imprisoned because of it, after the attack on Marley, to which he broke out of. Eren's father, Grisha, and sister snuck out of the Eldian internment zone when they were children. Zeke, as a child, disobeyed his parents and snitched on the Eldian restorationists. The fake royal family that was running the government on Paradise Island, they were replaced because they were trying to get rid of the Scouts. The Scouts who were protecting Paradise, which they believed at the time to be the last of humanity. Zeke later goes against orders and betrays Marley. Hell, just before Eren is killed, he told Mikasa to forget about him, but she refused, while still accepting what needed to be done, that Eren had to die. Better yet, the person who set all of these events in motion in the Attack on Titan story is a perfect example of this. Ymir, who, as a slave, allegedly let pigs out of the pig pen, with the entire village snitching on her for doing so. That's what leads her to being hunted by the tribe and finding the power of the Titans. Interestingly, after she became the founder, and she's within the paths all this time, she follows the tradition of only listening to those with royal blood who have access to the founder. But when it's Eren and Zeke, Eren who does not have royal blood and Zeke who does, when Zeke yells out to her, demanding and commanding her to sterilize all Eldians, she disobeys Zeke. She goes against the tradition of only listening to those with royal blood, and she decides to side with Eren, who approached her with humanity, who acknowledged her humanity, who didn't command her, but rather told her that she has a choice. That prompted her to disobey Zeke and enable Eren's plan.
And instead, what is seen is an entire society that is dominated by the military, a society where a coup d'etat is celebrated because the old, ineffective leaders are cast out. But what changes? The story of the queen is made into the new puppet. Instead of really being ruled by elites, there's the military. Our main characters, Eren, Armin, and Mikasa, are child soldiers who obey every command the military gives them, and although they are tasked in killing titans, if they are tasked in killing innocent civilians, they would do it.
Yes, they are child soldiers. Both sides of the war engage in child soldiers. But what gives you this idea they would just kill civilians, no questions asked? Aside from policing, they haven't gone out of their way to harm or attack their own people. They have taken efforts to save them from Titans, to sacrificing lives to regain territory so they could have food for their people. If you're going to make a claim like this, you should have an example. This is just a bold assertion.
All that is needed for Eren to kill is hatred. And then there's that slogan that every scout, every soldier cheers when they enter the military. Dedicate your heart. But let's put a pin in that one for now. The main character, Eren Yeager, is an interesting case study. As after his mom gets killed by the Titan, Eren vows in pure hatred that he would kill all Titans. A kid with pure hatred. We are to follow this child and think he is the savior, the hero. And even when the truth is revealed, Eren's hate does not fade away. When the group defeats all of the Titans and liberates the island of the internal and external enemies and reach the ocean, Eren looks beyond the sea, pointing and declaring that beyond the sea, there are more enemies that he has to kill, and that only when all of them are dead, he and his friends can be free. What fuels this desire is hatred. It is here where one can see some fascistic rhetoric bleed out, because once Eren says this, he is no longer the hero, but the villain.
Since you're not going to explain why and just leave it up to Eren's hatred, only to continue making claims about it, I will explain for you. Aaron's initial stance as a child was that the Titans were why humanity was surrounded by the walls and couldn't leave. He didn't know there was an outside world to the degree that he later found out. He just wanted to see it. We, the viewer, didn't really know until the reveal to Aaron. The story had Aaron, the main cast, the Eldians at Paradise, and the viewer under the belief they were the last of humanity. Aaron felt trapped and caged by that, like an animal. He literally says this in the first chapter of the manga, or the first episode. It's even said in the horrible movies Toei made. Caged like an animal. I wonder what character that could possibly have a connection to. Note that the main soundtrack for Aaron is named Vogel im Käfig. I probably just butchered the pronunciation, but that's German for bird in a cage. A bird is used symbolically throughout the entire manga for freedom and aspiring for freedom. Child Aaron soaring above the clouds as he says freedom. At the end of the manga, a bird adjusts the scarf around Mikasa's neck, like Aaron had constantly done. The point is, Child Aaron sought freedom, and the Titans were who he initially believed to be preventing that freedom, to have taken his freedom. Having seen them eat his people, including his mother, Child Aaron wanted to get rid of all the Titans in order to achieve freedom from the walls. And in his pursuit for freedom, just when he thinks that he has it, just when everyone around him, his friends, think that they have it, he learns a terrible truth. The basement secret. That truth being that there is a far greater threat, far more than just the simple Titans they had been dealing with. The Titans were actually his own people, other Eldians who had been forcibly turned into Titans so that they would prey on the people of Paradise, and that it was perpetrated by Marley. The Titans he had been killing were his own people, victims who were turned by a country that treats its people like second-class citizens and cattle for war, using them literally like bombs to be dropped and monsters to be deployed. That the rest of the world hates Eldians. Aaron realizes they are his enemy, replacing the Titans who he wanted to destroy all of, and thus must be destroyed for his freedom. He eventually learns that the entire world is rallying with Marley, contemplating attacking Paradise, and poses a threat to the island where he and his friends live. Whether you like it or not doesn't matter. It's consistent with his character, and it's consistent with the main theme of the story, war. That humanity is in a never-ending cycle of violence and war, seeking to wipe out their enemies. This is especially emphasized with the final chapter of the manga, where it's shown that even after Aaron's death, the city of Paradise is bombed into a ruin, and the tree Aaron was buried at grows into the same tree where Ymir found the power of the Titans, with a child venturing into the tree just like Ymir once did. Aaron's sentiment of wiping out his enemy entirely is seen again and again throughout real-world history and war, which is what Attack on Titan is about. If media literacy is as dead as you insist, people like yourself are the culprits.
Fascists in Japan, Italy, Nazi Germany, America, and Israel all cast a group of people to be their enemy within. 3 of the main fascist states in World War II cast the communists as the enemy and used the words such as cancer, for fascism was believed to be the cure. In Germany, there was also the monstrous Jews, who were also linked to communism, and the only way to cure German society was to exterminate all of the Jews. Whenever there's a construction of an enemy within, there's always an external enemy. All fascist states have and had an external enemy who served and do serve as a boogeyman of sorts. But, like the enemy within, hatred was directed to them as well. In Imperial Japan, the external enemy was the Soviet Union and America, and the notion of modernism. In Germany, it was the communist threat posed by the USSR, and also the liberal West. America, during the Second World War, also followed a similar pattern, as the external enemy, for the most part, were the Japanese. This fascistic dichotomy of the enemy within and the enemy abroad is bred from fear. For an example, the USA after 9/11 was overwashed with fear, and the enemy abroad and within were this vague grouping of Muslims. Muslim Americans became, according to Bush, ticking time bombs, and many innocent people in America and Iraq and Afghanistan perished because of this thought. In all of these countries, there's a politics of fear that is used to repaint the enemy. In present-day America, the enemy is connected to the Chinese or the Russians, right? At the beginning of the Ukraine-Russian conflict, everyone went out and said, hey, there are Russians living here. They may be the enemy within. And you may ask, how is this fascistic? According to Umberto Eco's Fascism, fascists tend to have an obsession with a plot, where there are enemies within and abroad planning or scheming a state's demise.
On top of what I just explained about Aaron, there are several problems with his comparison that show just how desperately LF is contorting the narrative to fit his conclusion. A. Let's go over the enemies. The Titans were not an enemy within their nation or their government. They were people that were purposely turned into people-eating monsters that wandered on the island and wandered into their nation to eat people. When the wall was broken down by invaders that were sent by Marley, who were children. Marley was not an enemy from within, not until their spies snuck in by kicking a hole in the wall and then charged another hole through another wall, leading to death, destruction, and mayhem. Marley is an external force, an external enemy. So Lost Futures is already off base because his comparison doesn't match. He said fascists have an obsession with a plot of an enemy within and an external enemy that they need to get rid of. But in Attack on Titan, that's not the dynamic that's set up. If he or anyone wants to argue that Annie, Reiner, and Berthold are the enemy within that is being obsessed over, then they would be validating what they would believe to be fascist tendencies that are ridiculous. Because Annie, Reiner, and Berthold did pose a threat to Eren and Paradis. Now, one could argue that the royal family were an enemy within, but denying that they were in fact a problem would be defending a mind-controlling oppressive monarchy, which I doubt LF would want to do. The problem here is that he's relying on a very vague defining that can apply to lots of various groups, and that's very important. He's lumping in the narrative acknowledging potential internal enemies as the same as fascist rhetoric, which again is interesting for my next point. B. He argues that deciding a group is an enemy and wanting to rid them, thinking that they're plotting, is inherently fascist, but this would make anti-fascists and modern-day communists fascists themselves. They believe that there's fascism within that needs to be rooted out, that the United States is fascist, and they seek to rid fascism. Mind you, Lost Futures is one of the very kind of people I'm talking about. Just take a look at his channel or his Twitter account. So if what he's describing is fascist, this would mean people who seek to destroy fascists are fascists themselves, which would make perfect sense because fascism was born from communism. Something tells me, though, he's incapable of seeing and acknowledging that he walked himself into that corner. Instead, it'll be some excuse for the hypocrisy like, the oppressed cannot become the oppressor. C. LF is describing something that has happened within nearly every nation at war and calling it fascist. As typical leftists, they broaden the scope of what constitutes fascism so they can apply it to whatever they don't like, usually something that goes against their sensibilities. Again, his Twitter feed is much of him accusing anything and everything of being fascist. He believes that Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is fascist, a story that also happens to portray fascism in the narrative. Since he wants to compare real-world events and history with Attack on Titan, which is perfectly fine, I'm not knocking him for doing that. I just wish he would do it better. I will do the same to prove a point. I don't care whether you're pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. Not my war. My opinion is I'm quite tired of the US getting involved in wars on behalf of Israel, let alone shilling money to them. That said, if deciding your enemy needs to be gotten rid of entirely is inherently fascist, then Lost Future himself is a fascist. He isn't just very pro-Palestine and freeing Palestine. His Twitter consists of talking about Israel falling and its inevitable demise. He clearly sees Israel and Zionism as the enemy and oppressor, and thus needs to go. He deems Zionism in Israel and Zionism in Palestine a problem that needs to go. What was it he said? Fascists obsess over an external enemy and an enemy within. By the standard he's relying on, his own bloated and leftist-stretched definition of fascism, and the way that he's using it, he's a fascist. This is a prime example of political brain rot and polarization. People like him have pulled the definition of fascism so far and wide to label anything they don't like fascist that they inevitably partake in the very behaviors they themselves said was fascist. Point is, war often involves people wanting to destroy the other side for what they have done. A viewpoint he has taken in, yet he accuses Attack on Titan of being fascist because it accurately portrays the consistent themes of war and conflict.
Eren Yeager's hatred is deeply connected to an obsession with a plot.
Which plot are you referring to? Because Reiner, Annie, and Berthold, who were a real internal threat, were essentially taken care of by this point. Annie was trapped in the crystal, Berthold was dead, and Reiner was back in Marley. Unless you're talking about the fact that Marley wanted to destroy Paradis, which is an external plot, and a very real plot that Marley was acting on. Sure, they want to destroy the people on the island that Eren lives on. They might have attacked his home and cost the lives of his people. He may even have his father's memories of being a second-class citizen and being oppressed in Marley. But he's just obsessing over a plot, and therefore fascist. His hatred is absurd. If acknowledging that your enemy is in fact plotting against you is fascist, then you and your ideological peers would also be fascist. Unless you mean to tell me you don't think fascists and Zionists are plotting against you. With how much you talk about fascism, one could easily say you're obsessed with fascism. For those that are dense, the point that I'm making is that he and those like him should be more careful with the talking points and the standards that they buy into and use to make these kind of claims.
And this is after he learned the truth that was in his father's basement. The hatred subsides even after he knows that there are other Eldians suffering. He, the hero, proclaims that everyone across the ocean is his enemy, and the only way for the island to be free is if they all die.
This scene that he shows is what I was talking about before. Eren realizes that he was wrong, that the Titans were not the ones oppressing him and confining him in the walls, that it was Marley, the people responsible for those Titans which forced the wall to be built because the king refused to fight. Marley, the same nation who oppressed his father, mind you, who he has the literal memories of. He didn't just have his father's notes about the outside world, but also his lived experience in Marley. This consists of Eren knowing that his aunt was eaten by dogs, fed to them, in fact, by Marley's soldiers. So Eren poses the question, if we kill them all, will we be free? Replacing the Titans in his mind, who he previously wanted to rid for his freedom, with the people on the other side of the ocean.
Every human being, for Eren, is deserving of death. The truth Isayama reveals does not change Eren, nor the story, but rather it makes it much more worse and much more fashy.
The truth doesn't change Eren? That is a very, very bold claim, to say the least. It changes his perspective. He learned that the Titans weren't oppressing him, that it was a nation across the ocean that was behind said Titans and sent the spies that attacked his home. LF was expecting his entire personality and characterization to change because of the reveal. This isn't shown in Jump. LF isn't taking into consideration Eren's previous perspective and then the nature of the truth that Eren learned. That nature being who was really behind what he's dealt with his entire life. Who was actually oppressing him. Here's a scenario. Let's say someone breaks into your house and kills a family member. You obviously dislike them and what they did, and you can pin that dislike on a suspect. That is until you find out that they were not alone. Someone else sent them to do it. Someone else planned it out and caused it. And you also learn that this individual still has it out for you and your loved ones. They still intend on ending you and them. Your dislike and possible hatred is going to carry over to the person you now know set the whole thing in motion. It's a similar thing with Eren, albeit more extreme. It's almost as if Lost Futures is avoiding looking at it from Eren's perspective so he can make his assertions and leaps, and then will acknowledge these details afterwards. I'm starting to think I've figured out what his actual problems are, but I want to see more before I get into stating it right off the bat.
So let's go over this truth. The true history found in the basement explains to the reader that there are people out there beyond the sea, and it repositions the characters and places them in the grandest of the world. The entire story until this point was focused on a tiny island, and in truth there's an entire continent. It is here where readers learn that the three spies that infiltrated the island, Bertolt, Reiner, and Annie, the three main antagonists, came from the nation of Marley, and so did Eren's dad. The Eldians on the mainland are akin to the Jews in the real world, as they are stamped with Arab mats and are confined to internment zones. They are placed there because they are being punished, and the entire world fears them. Readers learn that Eren's dad lost his sister because he escaped the walls one day with her, and it was here where Grisha, Eren's dad, learns the cruelty of the world. Due to escaping the internment zone, the Marley police punish Grisha and his sister by having her eaten by dogs. It is this cruelty that causes Grisha to despise the state and rightly hate Marley. We learn that as Grisha grows up, he finds and joins a secret organization. However, this is where I think Isayama messes up, as this Marlin state clearly resembles Nazi Germany, and many leaders paired the Eldians to the Jews. But Grisha does not join an anti-fascist or anti-Marlin resistance group, or general Eldian liberation group, but the Eldian restorationalists. We're going to put a pin in that in a second, but from the name one can deduce that this group seeks to restore the Eldian Empire, and we'll get into why this is problematic, but for now, I'll say that the goal of the Eldian Empire is exactly the same as Hitler's "Make Germany Great Again," or in recent memory, Donald Trump's "Make America Great Again."
Oh, so he's just fucking retarded. Comparing Trump with Hitler? Leftists have been doing this for a while now. In fact, it was these kinds of comparisons that fearmongered a lot of people. Desiring to restore a nation to a point that you believe it was better at is not inherently fascist. Again, this guy supports Palestine and the Free Palestine movement. I find this interesting because I think I've grasped his disconnect. He seems to think that if you call your movement a liberation, it's so much more different than calling it a restoration. It's not, though. You can sugarcoat your movement with all kinds of euphemisms and wonderful sounding terms, but it comes down to actions. For example, just because some people like to call themselves the anti-bad guy, good guy club, doesn't make them good, especially when you factor in their actions and what they believe in. Both the Eldian Restorationists and Free Palestine aim to free their people from who is oppressing them and to restore their nation back to themselves. That's why they're called Eldian Restorationists. Never mind the fact that the Eldian Restorationists wanted to bring back the Eldian Empire, which no longer existed by that point. And he knows this because he says it right after this. That isn't the same as returning a nation to a previous state of the same nation, like Trump wants to do with MAGA. So even then, it isn't a good comparison for him to make. One is bringing back an empire that no longer exists, and the other is reverting that empire back to a previous period. I think this is an obvious difference. Now, I already know I'm going to get comments saying, how dare you compare Palestine to Eldia? No country has clean fucking hands or is a perfect victim by any means. There is no such thing as a perfect victim. Oppression and horrible atrocities happening are not a one-way street like a lot of people want to pretend for the sake of their tribalism. Both sides in war do horrible things to each other. Bombings, child soldiers, taking hostages. That is unfortunately war. What I'm really talking about is this right here. Any resistance against colonizers is not terrorism in the same way any riots of black people against the police and white supremacy is not terrorism. I don't think you know what BLM is without accepting that. The people justifying and excusing these bad things with the oppression and pretending it's different because of their oppression are the problem. It's because these people, ironically, have an obsession with the dynamic of oppressor and oppressed, and anything the oppressed does is excused by the oppression. It's the opposite of this that makes Attack on Titan so good. It shows that Eldia did horrible acts. Marley resisted. Marley went from oppressed to oppressor and did horrible acts back. Eldians resisted. Eren absolutely took horrible leaps. More fucked up shit happened afterwards. Something tells me that's a main reason why leftists like Lost Futures don't like Attack on Titan, because it shows that the oppressed can become oppressors and do bad things in return, because it shows that the oppressed can become radicalized and do horrid things. It may be a fictional story, but it reflects that ugly truth. An ugly truth that is the antithesis of one or two of the most popular leftist talking points. Firstly, leftists like to prop up radicalism as needed and necessary, and they say that the oppressed cannot become the oppressor. While the characters may excuse horrid things with their oppression, the story does not. The narrative shows it for what it is. War and violence breeds more war and violence. Just like Eren sought to destroy whom he deems his enemy, Lost Futures wants to destroy who he deems his enemy. Zionists and fascists. He engages in the same behavior he claims is specific to fascists, while claiming to be against fascism. That Eren is apparently fascist for doing it, and yet he tries to act holier than thou while saying similar things. There's quite a parallel because Attack on Titan shows radicalism, and radicalism is not just a right-wing or fascist thing. Deciding you have an external or internal enemy is not specific to fascists or the right wing. Prejudice and hatred is not specific to the right wing. Karl Marx himself didn't like Jews. Contrary to popular belief, communists and fascists aren't that different. They bullshit people differently, they sugarcoat their ideologies a little bit differently, but in practice, when they exercise their power, they're very similar. But this video isn't for that. I'm not here to grandstand and moral fag over it either. And I don't give two fucks for who he sides with, whether Palestine or Israel. I don't care. I care that he's very ignorant in his claims about a story I enjoy, and he has no shred of self-awareness in the things that he says.
This grand plan is to bring back the powerful Eldian Empire and end Eldian oppression by putting Marley back into its place, by crushing it with the power of the founder, which can start a thing known as the Rumbling. But let's put a pin in that for a second, because Eren's version of the Eldian Restorationists is much more fascist.
Eren's version is much more fascist. That statement implies that these people simply wanting to liberate themselves and to restore their previous empire to end the oppression that they're currently facing is fascist. which is an interesting thing to imply given what you yourself believe in and support. Aside from that, yes, they are uneducated, as you say here on screen. And the reason they are uneducated is because their oppressors have created a fake or much more exaggerated, altered version of history that they have. So the only thing they do have is their own theories and their own takes on history. Obviously, history and the various tellings of history can be very subjective, especially when there are victors who often rewrite history and events to either include certain things, exclude certain things, or just change the entire history as a whole. Marley, in particular, came up with this story that Ymir got her powers from this devil. To further reinforce the idea of the island devils, the Eldians were these devilish people. While the Eldians, in return, came up with their own idea of history. This is not uncommon for people who have been oppressed and know nothing about their history. They will oftentimes make up things about their history. We can see this in the case of black people saying that they were Egyptians and Vikings and so on. They're making up history to fill in the gap of not knowing their people's history. Not only did their ancestors have their history stripped from them, but it's become increasingly difficult for their descendants in the modern day to learn about their history, given that many liberals like to retell history or cut out certain parts of their history so that they can avoid certain contradictions in the black and white narrative that they rely on. A perfect example of this is the movie The Woman King from 2022, a movie that was written by two liberal white women and that portrays historical fiction about the Dahomey tribe, to say the least. More specifically, painting the Dahomey tribe as victims of the Portuguese and slave trade when they were willing participants who enslaved those that they conquered, engaged in human sacrifice, and refused to give up slavery long after the rest of the world had done so.
At the end of the flashback, we learn that the Eldian restorationist based in Marley fails and gets caught because Grisha's son Zeke and Eren's older half-brother snitches. The truth reveals that all Titans that surround Paradise and on the walls were in fact Eldians from Marley who were turned into Titans as punishment. Although Isayama never provides details into how the Titan serum was created, there's had to be human experiments.
Isayama never provides details on how the Titan serum is made. Interesting thing about that. So, does it look like you'll be able to discover what is in that bottle? Well, about that, this is all we can find out with the technology we currently possess. As we heard from Eren in Historia, it seems to contain ingredients based on human spinal fluid. There seems to be more as well, but as soon as the liquid touches air, it evaporates, making analysis difficult. What exactly is this panel if not that? I don't know how you missed this as someone who's watched it, because I think it comes up at least twice. The Titan serum is derived from the spinal fluid from any of the 9 Titan shifters, and when it comes into contact with a subject of Ymir or Eldian who doesn't have one of the 9 Titan powers, it triggers the transformation, turning them into a mindless Titan. The mindless Titan then searches for humans to eat, hoping that they possess one of the Titan powers so that they can return to their humanity of sorts. What's clear is that whatever turns them into Titans, whether mindless or a Titan shifter, it resides in the spine, because mindless Titans have to ingest the spinal fluid of a Titan shifter to inherit their Titan. This is explained by Rod Reyes to Historia when he's trying to get her to turn into a mindless Titan and eat Eren.
Later in the manga, we learn Zeke, the Wonder Boy, would help the state create weapons out of his spinal fluid, which would enable Marley to drop pure Titans like bombs, or plant Eldians in cities and have them spring up in the center to terrorize the enemies of Marley.
In more plain, direct terms, Marley enslaved and was exploiting the Eldian people for a purpose of war, using them literally as war machines. Why are you tiptoeing around that fact?
So let's move on to the fascism in Attack on Titans. Where do I even begin this? That was the question that I kept asking myself. When I finished Attack on Titans, I went to Roberto Echo first. And I was like, okay, I could look down all 14 points and compare it to that. And it didn't really match up. So then I was like, okay, let's look at Tosaka, let's look into this Japanism, let's look into the Japanese relation to fascism. And then I was like, okay, this is getting closer, but it's not really hitting the nail. And that's when I ran into Emilio Gentili in his 2000 article where he concises his points and his findings, which is, the article is called Fascism and the Italian Road to Totalitarianism. And what one has to really understand is that fascism in Attack on Titans is hard to pin down because it is like Japanese, a form of fascism that is flexible and works almost in stealth.
Oh, okay, I see. So after admitting that you've had to hop from one historian to another historian's perspective and ideas on what fascism is, because it didn't quite match, your cope for that, your convenient cover story is, it's because the fascism in Attack on Titan is very flexible and stealth. Okay, sure.
To uncover it, one has to read critically.
Read critically. From the guy who's had to contradict the plot points he's already acknowledged, who used absurd logic for how Isayama contradicted the anti-war sentiment with Erwin's character, and didn't even know one of the most basic facts about the Titan Serum. And not only did you not know the basic facts about the Titan Serum, but you asserted that Isayama never provided an explanation for that. So critical of you.
And deconstruct it like it's propaganda.
So we can take critical and deconstruct off of our leftist buzzword bingo chart.
So I leaned on scholars of fascism. My primary scholar became Emilio Gentili, and my secondary scholars were Roberto Echo and Tosaka Shun. The reason why I'm using 3 is because fascism in Attack on Titan includes multiple forms of fascism, which includes modern and neo-fascism.
More like you're having to hodgepodge and pull from 3 different people who have 3 different takes because it doesn't actually match with what you want it to. So you're having to stretch and broaden the horizon on what constitutes as fascism by pointing to 3 different scholars and historians on that to assert it. But let's hear this guy out. Let's hear him out.
Emilio Gentili begins to uncover the road to totalitarianism by examining the militia parties that sprung up in Italy. And since Attack on Titan is so focused on the military, it is almost inevitable for a militia group to form, and they are the Jaegerists. When and how they were created is vague, but they are the followers of Eren Yeager. It can be assumed that Yelena has her own form of this, as she worships Zeke and Eren, but Isayama does not make it clear to when and how the masses and the soldiers became Jaegerists.
And the first point that you're relying on has the same problem as before. Emilio describes in this point that they see their political adversaries as an internal enemy that needs to be gotten rid of and destroyed. Quite like how the Nazis viewed Jews as an external and internal enemy within them that had to be gotten rid of. But the Jaegerists don't see their opposition as an internal enemy. The Jaegerists don't have that. They do not have a particular group inside Paradis that they are gunning for. Their single goal was to unite Eren and Zeke so that they could do the rumbling and get rid of their external enemy that was planning to destroy them. The enemy that knew they would do the rumbling if they attacked. This was not an internal enemy like you keep trying to insist. The Jaegerists not only aimed to initiate the rumbling and destroy the outside world because they were threatening them, but also they planned to abolish Paradis's military government, and they would have established a new Eldian empire. So you complain about the military government of Paradis, and you call it fascist, but then you also try and lump in the Jaegerists who plan on abolishing that very government and are resisting it fascist, when their goals, in fact, line up with revolutionaries more than fascists. The math is not mathing here. You're trying to cram Attack on Titan to force it to fit what you want it to be so that you can complain about it here, rather than what it actually is. Now, with that set aside, the other elements to the Jaegerists themselves do make them a problem. The ultranationalism, the superior race-esque things that are sort of there with some of the believers and some of the rhetoric, stuff like that. However, portraying fascism in its varying degrees does not make it fascist. It's very obviously a cautionary tale of how war and violence continues to keep happening. So it's going to have to show how war and violence keep happening.
And we'll We'll get to the masses, but for now, let's focus on the Yeagerists in the military, because these Yeagerists are the ones who commit terrorist attacks and take over the nation under the command of Eren. They are like the brown shirts of Italy. But let's push the Yeagerists and the brown shirts aside for a second.
You're really just flat out comparing the Yeagerists to the brown shirts of Germany. While there are obviously some similarities, there are also differences. Very key differences I think you're intentionally ignoring. First of all, the Yeagerists were responding to a real, already existent threat that was rallying the world's forces to go against them. A threat that has a history of treating their people like second-class citizens. And I'll circle back to that in just a moment. While the brown shirts of Germany, and in general the National Socialists, ended up creating the world threat against them and causing the world to rally against them because of their actions. Now that doesn't exclude how the world treated Germany after World War I, but that's not the same thing. It wasn't like the National Socialists came to be as a party because the world was about to rally and attack on them. No, the world gathering together, the US, the USSR, and the UK, all working together, didn't happen until after the National Socialists rose to power and began doing the fucked up shit they did. Simply put, the Yeagerists are responding to a threat. That's how they came to be, was because of that threat, while the National Socialists created said threat. And that's a very glaring key difference between the two of them. You're flat out ignoring the circumstances of the Yeagerists to compare them to the brown shirts of Germany. Circling back to what I said previously, what group was it that treated another group of people like second-class citizens, restricting them to internment zones, and even using armbands to designate who was of the proper group and who was of the lesser group, the devilish people? That was Marley, not the Yeagerists. And on the surface level, that is a comparison between Marley and Germany, how Marley treated the Eldians and how Germany treated the Jews. But it's not one-to-one, because something I need to bring up and emphasize more is that Marley was once oppressed by the Eldians, and it's exactly why they keep using their oppression and the historical events and the bad things that the Eldian ancestors did to justify how they're treating the Eldians in the present. And that is not something exclusive to right-wing or fascism either. An oppressed and oppressor group of people demonizing each other based upon the actions they've done to one another is very common, whether it be the Native American tribes that technically aren't really native themselves and came over when the land bridge was there, but regardless, and the colonists. Or in more recent times, you can see that kind of rhetoric from the left wing, specifically anti-racism and critical race theory. They have this weird obsession with white people. Oftentimes straight white men, they treat them differently. They argue that you can't be racist towards white people, literally relying on the "you can't oppress your oppressor" litany to argue exactly that, among other mental gymnastics. They've gone as far as trying to redefine what racism means for exactly that. They discriminate against white people.
Attenuate tenuous body. I don't care about you. Shut up, you white monkey. You a dog in this country. You're a fucking dog. You're nothing over here. You are a dog. Shut up. I'm Black American. I'm over you.
So their system is not stopping. And then finally, I want to say that we need one idea. And we're not thinking about a solution to the problem. We're dealing with all these other things, but these are diversions from the solution to the problem. And we have to start to think about a solution to the problem so that these young brothers and sisters who are here now, who are 15, 16, and 17, are not here 25 years later talking about these same problems. Now, how do I know that the white people know that we are going to come up with a solution to the problem? I know it because they have retina scans, they have what they call racial profiling, DNA banks, and they're monitoring our people to try to prevent the one person from coming up with the one idea. And the one idea is how we are going to exterminate white people, because that, in my estimation, is the only conclusion I have come to. We have to exterminate white people. We have to exterminate white people off of the face of the planet to solve this problem. Now, I don't care whether you clap or not, but I'm saying to you that we need to solve this problem because they are going to kill us.
The babies. Huh? To hell with what National Geographic putting out. I'm telling you to your face here tonight, we gonna have to kill some little Penelopes and some little Robbies. You wanna be free, don't you? Y'all bullshit me. Not sounding like that.
Why we gotta kill them?
Kill them all. You don't want to be free sounding like that. Right. Do you want to be free? Yeah. Do you want to be free?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to be free?
Yes, sir.
That's why I got to fight this crap. Regardless to how you feel about me. Regardless to how anybody in this damn world feels about me. I'm going to fight this goddamn white man. Whether you like it or not. I believe in the death and destruction of white people. Each and every one of them. Don't give a damn if the little bastard just came out of his mama's womb 3 seconds ago. Kill them all.
One way black people achieve true liberation, that's by taking it in blood. There has to be blood all over the floor. There has to be bodies on the floor. There has to be people screaming and crying. That is the reality. And this is what history shows me. No amount of begging, no amount of complaining, no amount of protesting, nada is going to get you your liberation until you take it with blood. You see? So this is why I sit back and I don't play along with any of these black people talking about it's a spiritual war and this, that.
But have a built-in excuse to deny that their discrimination is discrimination. They claim to be against systemic racism and discrimination, and that it's institutional, but then they actually argue and want to institutionalize discrimination.
So earlier this week I made a post saying that it doesn't sit right with me that there are white people who own property, multiple properties at that, in the United States of America while black and indigenous people are experiencing homelessness. And I want to expand on that, especially for my new followers who are white, who followed me because of my anti-racist content. I'm glad that you're listening to me, but I really want to make sure that you're hearing what I'm saying. There will never be black liberation or indigenous sovereignty as long as the United States of America exists. If you want black folks around the globe and in this country liberated, if you want indigenous folks to be able to have sovereignty over the lands that they're indigenous to, then the United States of America needs to cease to exist. And I don't know if y'all are ready for that. I don't know if that's what y'all signed up for. I'm not sure if anti-racist work is just something you do to lessen the inconvenience of racism in your life, but I hope you're ready for this. It's not for the weak.
Via affirmative action and DEI policies. We've seen them engage in segregation, whether it be with the blackout movie theaters, or the incident that was all the way back in 2017 when a school demanded that white students and faculty not show up on a particular day, and then when they did, tried to accuse them of being racist.
The annual Day of Absence at Evergreen State College involved minority students leaving campus for the day to raise awareness of their contributions. But in 2017, organizers decided to reverse the roles and ask white students and faculty to leave campus instead.
Get out! You're not helpful! Get out!
Brett Weinstein, a white professor, objected, citing these demands as forced segregation and discriminatory. And soon after, Weinstein's objections were met with protests and accusations of racism as student activists called for his resignation for promoting white supremacy.
Frankly, every student in that hallway has a clue about where they're going wrong.
You have the zealots of critical race theory and anti-racism in particular, who do demonize white people. Ashley Shackelford in her seminar calling white people demons.
All white people are racist. So I put this up because I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, oh, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually. So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human, like that actually, instead of people of color and black folks being dehumanized, that actually everyone is dehumanized off rip within white supremacy, that y'all are born into a life to not be human, and that's what y'all are taught to do, to be demons.
And what do these people do? How do they argue these things? How do they justify these things? They point to what the white people's ancestors did, to shame them, to make them feel guilt, which is why many of the white people that dabble in those politics have self-hate and white guilt.
We know he's being God and he no longer can be here. In honor of his legacy, we're not rioting, God. We're not shaming anybody, God. We're just humbling ourselves before you. Yes, Lord. You brought the thunder and rain today, God, because Satan takes the L today. Father, in Jesus' name, you get the victory. Father, We ask for forgiveness from our black brothers and sisters for years and years of racism, of systematic racism.
About racism, anti-blackness, or violence.
About racism, anti-blackness, or violence.
I will use my voice in the most uplifting way possible.
I will use my voice in the most uplifting way possible.
And do everything in my power to educate my community.
And do everything in my power to educate my community.
I will love my black neighbors the same as my white ones.
I will love my black neighbors the same as my white.
And you can see something like that, although more extreme, in Attack on Titan. There are Eldians in Marley who do have self-hate, who do view themselves as lesser because they've been beat down again and again with the same rhetoric, using the sins of their ancestors against them to justify how they've been treated as less than human, as a devil, or that they have devil's blood. They accept that view and treatment as needed, as deserved, and as the way it is. They internalize it. And although in the real world, leftists try to present internalized racism as something people of color specifically experience, it's really not. Based upon their own description of the conscious or unconscious acceptance of racist stereotypes, biases, and negative beliefs that people of color accept about themselves and their own racial group, that it leads to self-hatred and devaluation of one's own culture and the reinforcement of social hierarchies, you can see those exact same symptoms and problems from the white people that engage the anti-racism rhetoric. Because anti-racism as a whole paints everything in relation to white people as bad and evil and white supremacy. For fuck's sakes, these people tried to call math and PBIS white supremacy. And expecting kids to be quiet and listen is a rule and standard set by white people because they're the majority, and therefore it's reinforcing white supremacy. I could get into all that, but the point is the behavior they're describing is not exclusive to people of color. And we see a similar variant of that in Attack on Titan. There's Willie Tiber, who apologizes for his existence and wishes that he wasn't even born because he's an Eldian. Mind you, the very same family that betrayed King Fritz and enabled Marley to be in the position that they're in now, where they can exploit and treat these people this very way. And just for the cherry on top, to really bring home my point, his main 2 points to compare the Jaegerists to the brown shirts of Germany is that the Jaegerists were nationalist and they were militant. And if that's all it takes to compare them to the brown shirts of Germany, regardless of their differences and regardless of the contextual differences of the political situation in the story, then I wonder what he has to say about the Black Panther Party. I seriously doubt he condemns them, let alone compares them to the brown shirts of Germany. Despite the fact that they were militant, they did have a militia, and they did incorporate nationalist ideals, specifically Pan-Africanist ideals. And if you don't know what Pan-Africanism is, it's a type of pan-nationalism, like white nationalism, but for Africans. The comparison is that they're both an oppressed people resorting to a nationalist militia. And something I've noticed in general with leftists is that they are very against nationalism. They vehemently oppose it, and they have legitimate reasons for opposing it and being wary of it. But that suddenly goes away when it's Pan-Africanism. Suddenly, nationalism isn't so bad. Suddenly, they're more understanding of nationalism. One of my favorite things about Attack on Titan is that while it has some similarities, some aspects to real-world history, you can't quite compare it one-to-one to historical events. I know what you mean. Obviously, you can't do that. It's fiction. There's science fiction, fantasy elements. But I mean, even excluding that, you can't compare it one-to-one to real-world events and historical war because of the fact that it's a mixed bag. Sure, the Jaegerists engage in nationalism, and they are a militia, similar to the brown shirts, but they also came about differently than the brown shirts. Marley, who started as an oppressed group and became a very militaristic, fascist government themselves. So they're not a one-to-one stand-in with Germany either. Isayama has mixed the bag enough with various elements, but done so in a plausible way by explaining how these people have reached these points through the lens of history and, people wronging each other and not letting go of the past and constantly pointing to their wounds. There's an entire speech given about people needing to let go of the past and moving on during the rumbling. Point is, it's a very mixed bag. And I think that that's one of the problems that Lost Futures is continuously running into here. And it's why he's had to broaden his horizon and pull from 3 different scholars on what fascism is and trying to define fascism, and saying that it's flexible and stealthy. Attack on Titan doesn't fit the box he wants it to, so he's got to force it in one way or another.
In his second point, Gentile emphasizes the mythic thought, but other scholars have emphasized the mythic origin. In Italy, there was the Roman Empire. In Germany,
you bring up the Roman Empire, but then the image you show is just a guy saying that pride isn't worth dying for, and isn't it better to submit than having such a brutal death? That doesn't really compare to the Roman Empire. Ancient Romans were profoundly prideful. Something such as willingly submitting rather than dying is not synonymously known with the Roman Empire. Another reason this comparison doesn't work is the fact that the ancient Marleyan Empire is actually based off of the Roman Empire, while the ancient Eldian tribe that became an empire is based off of Germanic tribes. However, Marley is then stopped, they lose their kingdom, Eldia becomes a kingdom, and then Marley comes back with the help of the Tiber family and destroys the Eldian Empire, becoming more like Germany with the way that they treat the Eldians, who are this universe's stand-in for Jews in the 1930s and 40s. It's a reversed and subverted historical narrative, like I said before, a mixed bag.
There was Hitler, who wanted to make Germany great again, and he even went to the lengths of creating fake history to tie the Germans to the Aryans. Finally, in America, there was, and still is, MAGA.
So I have 2 points here. The first of which is showing you the image that he has pop up when he brings up MAGA. And before anyone complains about how it's low quality in my video and that I downloaded a low quality video, this guy uploaded his video in 380p. That's not on me. But I went ahead and I found the panel, or at least the same part of the panel that he showed, so that we can take a look at it and read it. The founding titan which King Fritz took with him to inside the walls. That is the key to Eldia's restoration. The founding titan has the ability to rule and control all other titans. If only we can get our hands on it, will we be able to destroy Marley once more. Yet again, Lost Future is trying to draw a comparison between the Eldian Restorationists and Make America Great Again, as he's already compared Make America Great Again to Make Germany Great Again. The problem is, across the board here, the Eldian Restorationists are an ethnic or race-based group, and they're looking to restore a no longer existent empire. They're trying to create a new Eldia. MAGA is not. MAGA is not ethnic or race-based. Sure, there are racists who are MAGA, and there are white nationalists or white supremacists that align with it, but the overall MAGA movement is not race-based. Contrary to popular belief, MAGA itself as a movement is not racist. There are racists within it, but racism is not specific to a political party. As I've already shown, there are racists on the left-wing side of things too. MAGA is not centered around an oppressed group of people. It's not a movement created by an oppressed group of people looking to free themselves from their oppressors. This is why I made the comparison of the Jaegerists to the Black Panther Party. Both the Eldian Restorationists and the Jaegerists, per their dynamic in relation to Marley and the world, are more closer to Black Panthers than they are to Germany or Make America Great Again.
Now, Eren and the Jaegerists seek to restore the Eldian Empire through the Rumbling. The entire project of the Eldian Restorationists and the Jaegerists is based and cemented in a mythic past, and the true history is actually one of blood and horror.
That's a half-truth, and I'm honestly shocked you're just taking that at face value and running with it. You see, the story gives us two perspectives. As the saying is, there's always two sides to every story, and Attack on Titan provides that and more. In Chapter 86, when Grisha's a kid, after he and his sister sneak out, Grisha's father explains to him Marley's propaganda story about their people's history. That their ancestor Ymir Fritz made a contract with the devil of all earth and in return received incredible power. The power of the Titans. That after her death, Ymir split her soul up into 9 pieces to be called the 9 Titans, and with their power built the Eldian Empire. Eldia destroyed the ancient kingdom of Marley and became the ruler of this continent. That the Dark Ages after that happened, and that the people of Ymir who held the power of the Titans declared all races to be inferior and began their oppression. That they took lands and property and made other races become extinct entirely. That they forced other peoples to bear them children, thus increasing their numbers. This process of ethnic cleansing went on for about 1700 years. However, later on, when Grisha is growing into being an adult, and he's working with the Owl, an inside agent who was Eren Kruger, he is given some information from inside. claiming that their ancestor Ymir was awakened by the Titan's power. She turned wasteland into fertile lands, built roads, erected bridges between mountains, and declared that Ymir gave to the people of the world riches and wealth, that she helped the people make this land bountiful and advanced. And each story has some details that are true at the same time. For those that were Eldian, because of Ymir being given that kind of immense power, they went from a small tribe that engaged in slavery to a massive empire, toppling other empires, and furthering not only their slavery, but then engaging in ethnic cleansing. So those who were Eldian prospered from the advancement, but those who weren't Eldian no doubt suffered. They were crushed under their heel. They were killed, eradicated, or used, taken advantage of, exploited. Both stories have certain details that are wrong or leave out certain things. For example, Marley's story claims that she made a deal with an earth devil, and this is no doubt what caused the Eldian people to be called devils and that they have devil blood. And while it is true that Ymir came into contact with something otherworldly, it was no devil of the earth, but rather some creature, some entity, referred to as the source of all living matter, that is capable of transporting matter through time and space, that can look into the future, that has a means of living beyond the physical world. So that mythical past is true. Unlike Germany, who created a fictitious mythical past to spur on pride in their people, the Eldians have a mythical past. And not one about a devil, but some kind of creature that is capable of doing things beyond our understanding. And that creature dwells within the Eldians. Another thing that the Marley story gets wrong is that it claims that Ymir split her soul up into 9 pieces. Her power was split into 9 pieces because the king Fritz, who had married her and forced her to have his children, made their 3 daughters eat the body of their mother, which thus passed the power of the Titans down and began the tradition of cannibalism, passing the power down. The fact that they started as a small tribe that engaged in slavery and apparently cannibalism is another reason why I brought up the Dahomey tribe. The Eldians have both a mythical past and origin, and also did engage in atrocities. And just like how the Marleyan kingdom was destroyed and toppled, the Eldian Empire was then destroyed and toppled by Marley because they did not eradicate all of their enemies. So their enemies, who remembered the loss that they took and the trauma and oppression they faced, then went back and striked again. And that's exactly what happens at the end of Attack on Titan that leads to the end of Paradise.
But Eden and the Aegis do not deny this bloody and horrific history, because they want to bring it back into reality and basically inflict another wave of horror to wash away the hatred of the continent.
Firstly, what do you mean bring it back into reality? It already is in their reality. How can they bring something back into their reality if it's already currently happening in the present of their reality? Not only did it happen historically, but it's also happening in the present of the story. The difference is, Marley is the one doing it, rather than ancient Eldia, who was doing it in the past. Just like how Eldia was forcing people to bear Eldians so that they could increase their numbers, Marley is keeping the Eldians captive and using them for war, for their warriors program, for their experiments, for dropping them from the sky, as weaponry against other enemies that also aren't even Eldia, such as the attack on Fort Slava. Secondly, the Eldian restorationists wanted to bring back and restore the ancient Eldian Empire. The Jaegerists want to create a new Eldian Empire. Now, one could argue that that's not that different, and I can understand that. However, there are further differences. Ancient Eldia engaged in genocide because they viewed themselves as the superior people. And while the Jaegerists do engage in nationalism, they don't view themselves necessarily as the superior people. They view themselves as a people that must band together because the world is literally rallying against them to eradicate them. When Eren attacked Marley, he attacked Liberio, and Liberio has an Eldian internment zone. That's where we get this conversation from Jean and Floch, where Jean tells Floch that they need to keep civilian losses to a minimum. But Floch disregards that, saying that everyone there is an enemy, meaning that the Jaegerist form of nationalism is less one of race and more one of nationality. Despite the fact that the people of Paradise and the Eldians in the internment zone are of the same race, Floch doesn't care. He sees them as an enemy regardless, which obviously isn't good and further shows Floch's radicalism. It also illustrates the differences between ancient Eldia's racial supremacy nationalism versus the Jaegerist nationalism. The Jaegerist form of nationalism is not a form of pan-nationalism, nor supremacy. And those two facts together diminish lost future comparing the Jaegerists to the brown shirts of Germany. The brown shirts of Germany, or the National Socialists, engaged and pan-nationalism, specifically pan-Germanism, to unify all German-speaking people and ethnic Germans into a single cohesive state, Greater Germany. That was Hitler's main goal, something LF himself has brought up. That was why Germany absorbed Austria, to fulfill Adolf Hitler's goal of a Greater Germany. But the Jägerists are not pan-Eldianists. They're not trying to unify all Eldian people. The Jägerist nationalism is a coping method, a response to how the world has treated them. In that specific way, it's kinda like Pan-Africanism. Now, I know I just explained that the Jägerists do not engage in pan-nationalism, while Pan-Africanism is a form of pan-nationalism, but I'm saying the intent behind it, the reasoning, the justification for why people buy into Pan-Africanism and why the Jägerists have nationalism is similar. Both feel like it's the appropriate response to how the world has treated their people. That doesn't make it okay, that doesn't make it right, but that is the reality. Due to the circumstances, they have been pushed into a mentality of it's either us or them, and we would rather it be us. They are choosing to rely on the deterrent that their king threatened them with because it's the only thing they seemingly can do, since the world is so determined to eradicate them while fully knowing of said deterrent. Ancient Eldia's motivation was supremacy. The Jägerist motivation is survival. Now, that's not a justification or an excuse for genocide. Genocide is genocide. There is no other indication that the Jägerists and their new Eldian empire, which would overthrow Paradis's current government, would engage in the exact same things that the previous Eldian empire did, like slavery or forcing people to give birth to their people.
It is here where we return to the Jägerists, who impose their rule through violence, repression, and terror. This point of C is also linked to Gentile's point of E, discrimination against the outsider.
And yet another shocking twist. The people who have been discriminated against are engaging in discrimination. It's almost like the fiction is trying to reflect something that happens in real life. I wonder what that could be. His video and his core argument is that Attack on Titan itself as a story is fascist. And his proof for this is that one of the forces in the story engage in fascist tendencies. Simply showing how radicalism can lead to fascism apparently means the story in and of itself is fascist. That is the room temperature IQ argument we're currently dealing with.
The Jägerists hate the people of Mari.
Why? 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 Why?
And as Isayama illustrates, would not hesitate to execute them publicly. This discrimination against the outside can be linked to Eren and his final solution.
I'm really glad that he brought this specific plot point up for two reasons. The first of which is that it partly goes against what he's trying to say about Attack on Titan. The panel that he shows and the plot point that he's referring to is when Floch was going to execute people like Anya Capone. The problem is that Lost Future's framing of it is not quite accurate. Floch was not about to execute Anya Capone and the others for simply being outsiders or Marleyan. He was going to shoot Yelena because her true intentions were not with the Jägerists like she was pretending, but rather with Zeke, who intended on taking the founder from Eren, or at least using Eren for the founder. Floch demanded that all of them, including Anya Capone, bow down to the new Eldian order. Despite initially helping the Jägerists, Anya Capone refused to pledge allegiance, and the why is very important. In fact, that's my second reason, because it goes against what he's trying to say about the story. This specific plot point holds a mirror to the Jägerists. The very reason Anya Capone refused was because he condemned the Eldians for perpetuating the same violence, turning into the same oppressor as Marley. Anya Capone, a character in this story, is calling out the Jägerists for doing exactly what they're doing, for becoming like Marley. And Lost Futures knows about this plot point. He's bringing it up, he's referring to it, but he just so happens to not acknowledge the very part of that plot point that goes against him trying to call the story fascist.
But first, let's talk about point B, demagoguery. To the Jägerists and the public, Eren is seen and treated like a god, a savior, a demagogue.
Taking a look at point B, demagoguery exerted through constant and all-pervasive propaganda, the mobilization of enthusiasm, the liturgical celebration of the cult of the party and the leader. Well, demagoguery comes from demagogue. And what does that mean? A political leader who seeks support by appealing to the desires and prejudices of ordinary people rather than by using rational argument. That definition doesn't fit Eren. Eren does not appeal to his supporters by desire or their prejudice. If there's anyone that he's appealed to in a dishonest way, that would be Zeke. But to his followers, he's simply addressing the elephant in the room, the threat that they are all facing, and that is rational. Secondly, that part about Eren being worshipped like a god. The reason Eren is worshipped like a god is because he quite literally possesses godlike power. Ymir was also revered in a similar light, and he possesses Ymir's power. Not only is he a Titan shifter, which is something that the rest of them are not, but he also has the founding Titan. We're talking not just about the power to transport matter through space and time, not just to simply look into the future, but to experience the past, present, and future all simultaneously. This is a mortal man who unironically has Greek god-esque power.
When he escapes prison and walks up shirtless, you get a sense that Eren is the strong man. And how he is drawn provides the reader with an illusion. The reader is constantly told that Eren is going to solve the problem beyond the walls, that he will wipe away the resentment and save humanity. People and the reader just have to trust him. Also, when looking at the image of Eren donning his hoodie, there's the sun that is rising. Could that be a purifying sun? Furthermore, to the Jaegerists, they proclaim that the people are now free because of Eren. He is the liberator. These words have meaning. The masses buy into it. For example, when Eren is in prison, Isayama presents a hysterical crowd that begs the military to free Eren, for he is the savior of the island, and the only one who could restore the Eldian Empire.
You are presenting it as though Eren is simply a man that they've put all this blind faith and hope into, when in actuality he's a man who has access to kind of real power, a legitimate power, that can and likely will determine the future of their people.
Eren, to these people, is a hero for taking revenge.
I wonder why he's viewed as a hero. It's not like he carried a massive boulder and plugged the hole in the district so that no more Titans could get in. It's not like he stuffed Rod Reyes' colossal Titan with explosives so that they could kill him. No.
There is a call for more blood. After the Jaegerists take over and the masses rally behind them and Eren, it is as if the masses are acting and voicing their thoughts as one. The fascist slogan that is being used here is dedicate your heart, and drawing back to gentility. This is the masses in complete subordination to the Jaegerists.
The masses' complete subordination to the Jaegerists. Really? Well, based on what Flock said himself, they only had a few within the military. If everyone was dedicated to the Jaegerist cause, they wouldn't have been able to lock Eren up, and he wouldn't have had to break out of prison. First, you complained about the military and survey corps and said that they were fascist. Then, when they're overthrown by the Jaegerists, you call the Jaegerists fascist, which I wouldn't really mind considering that people who are fascist can also be against another form of fascism. It's not much of a shock. Communists exist, Antifa. But what's really odd is that you noted that the Jaegerists did terrorist attacks and executions and had to overthrow their government.
Let's focus on the Jaegerists in the military, because these Jaegerists are the ones who commit terrorist attacks and take over the nation under the command of Eren.
But now you're saying that they had total dedication of the public.
The phrase even spells out what is truly meant, as when one dedicates their heart, they are presenting total dedication to the new state and to its leader, Eren.
Dedicate your heart is not the Jaegerist fascist slogan. That's the slogan or motto and salute from the Survey Corps. And the context behind that is that the Survey Corps was formed when these people thought they were the last of humanity. The majority populace, the public of Paradise, had no idea about the outside world. For years, they believed they were the last ones, that they were all that was left of humanity. And so the Dedicate Your Heart Survey Corps motto was to signify absolute commitment, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. It symbolizes giving one's life and soul for humanity's cause.
What one has to understand is that fascism is a mechanism that is and has been used to socially control the masses. And Isayama is illustrating a mass of people completely under the spell of Eren.
Under a spell for Aaron? What does that even mean? If he approached them in a dishonest manner, if he made promises and said that he was going to do this and that, and then he didn't do any of that, I would agree with you. They would be bamboozled. They would be falling for it. But that's not what happened. He made a promise to use the founder to do the rumbling, and then he tried to do exactly that.
Even as he marches to trample on the world. Now, skipping past Eren's final solutions, Isayama presents an ending of Attack on Titan that is pro-fascist and showcases Japanism. Even when Eren dies, the Aegis and their fascist movement does not end with Eren's death, but it continues, and this is because the form of fascism that is operating here is Japanism. Japanism does not require a central leader to guide the masses, but rather functions of loyalty of the citizens and their dedication to the state.
Doesn't require a central leader, really, because the points that you're relying upon do in fact require a leader. Emilio Gentile's 10-point framework characterizes fascism as a political religion that relies on a cult of the leader, who is seen as an infallible figure embodying the nation's mission and guiding a militarized totalitarian movement. But because that isn't the case here, you're saying it's another form of fascism on the sole basis that citizens are loyal and dedicated to the state, something that is not exclusive to fascism, but is exaggerated and expected to an absurd degree in fascism.
Attack on Titan is a story where fascism wins, as the island cries out as one, and although they wiped out 80% of the world, there is still fear, and the war continues. This connects to what Umberto Eco wrote in his 9th point, focusing on permanent warfare. For the fascists, there is a never-ending war, and that no peace can exist. That is what Isayama is presenting in this ending.
First, being fearful of retaliation after what Eren did is not saying that the war is going to go on forever. It's not desiring for the war to go on forever. The fact that they're having fear about that implies that they don't want that. Them having fear is probably because they know that when people are wronged, they want to get even, if not more. That is simply human nature. We have literally thousands of years worth of history showing exactly that. Secondly, the ending doesn't say that peace is non-existent. The ending shows that peace is brief. There are moments of peace, there are moments of conflict. That conflict is never ending because peace is brief. It exists, but it is brief. Why do you people have such a hard time understanding that? Acknowledging a reality is not fascist.
The final lines the people chant can be linked to Imperial Japan's defeat and modern-day Japan. The way I read the ending...
Did you catch that? He switched from saying that the story is this to the way he read it.
Was that this is the Japan Isayama envisions. One that is remilitarized. One where people dedicate their hearts to fight. And one that cries out as one. The very line, the island cried out as one, can be tied to what Sasaka Jun witnessed and wrote about as a key component to Japanism was when all of the Japanese people sang harmoniously. One nation under a rising sun. However, the final chant of the Aegis may be what Isayama desires the most, and how he sees the defeat of Imperial Japan. The line, "If we lose, we die," is deeply tied to Japan in World War II, as people's lives were sacrificed so the rulers may live. It was a cult of death, where citizens were commanded to fight to the death. But the second line is connected to modern-day Japan and remilitarization. If we don't fight, we can't win. Meaning that since Japan has been bound for 70 years, if a threat from the continent comes, they would lose. And so Isayama ends by sending a message to the Japanese, so they may fight. Fight.
Ah, so he's saying that the Eldians are Isayama's stand-in for the Japanese. You know, this would be a great argument and all, if it weren't for the fact that contextually, the Eldian history is not the same as the Japanese. For starters, they're based off of a Germanic tribe. Secondly, the Japanese weren't really treated like the Eldians. They did have some harsh, rough, horrible treatment in the US. I wouldn't compare it one-to-one to what the Eldians have gone through. The entire world was not looking to wipe out Japan. But to be fair to Lost Futures, let's entertain this idea. After all, during World War II, the US had some interesting things to say about the Japanese, at the very least. American citizenship does not necessarily determine loyalty, but we must worry about the Japanese all the time until they are wiped off the map. General John L. Dewett. And this was in regard to Japanese citizens in the US because they were treated horribly. So let's pretend for a moment that the Eldians are Isayama's stand-in for the Japanese. Even so, the story shows that both sides of the war effort are engaging in the same mentality, that they need to wipe their enemy off of the face of the earth, off of the map. They need to get rid of them entirely. Both sides were gearing up to do exactly that. It's just that the Eldians, through the founding Titan and Eren, were able to destroy nearly everyone else before everyone else could destroy them. So not only does the story show how both sides reached that kind of conclusion and radical decision, but it also has people from both sides band together to try and stop what they can stop. It has several characters in the story confronting other characters for their wrongdoings. So this idea that Attack on Titan is Isayama's way of saying that's what Japan should have done is absurd. He's merely showcasing a mentality in war that has been seen time and time again between individuals engaging in war.
Attack on Titan ends by validating the words of a maniac, an edgelord, who used this logic to mass murder 80% of the population. And to Isayama, Eren was right. The fight will continue until either Eldia disappears or the world does. This is the same logic used by Japan in World War II, as it was a war without mercy, a war where the Japanese and Americans sought to exterminate each other, and as a political take, it is very childish and very dangerous.
There are several problems already. The text describes what Eren believed would happen, and says perhaps he was right. That's not the same as saying he was right, it's suggesting he might be right. Validating would be saying he was right, not perhaps he was right. And while Eren's actions are atrocious and horrific, his logic was not as absurd, ridiculous, or out there as you'd like to put it. After all, there have been countless nations or kingdoms or countries, even tribes, that have been destroyed or their entire people completely wiped out. And your refusal to confront the fact that Attack on Titan is reflecting that fact tells me that you're probably historically retarded. Third, that is in no way Isayama saying that Eren was right. As I've already gone over from Isayama's interview, he's not trying to pass judgment on what is right or wrong. He wants to consider the root of an issue rather than evaluating what is right. And that he wants Shingeki no Kyojin, or Attack on Titan's ending, to resemble that. An author having a character do something bad does not mean that they agree with it or think that it's right. And for you to argue that and then proceed to call Isayama childish is such projection. Like a child, you need your fiction to tell you what is right and wrong, to tell you what to think. And that's why you glaze One Piece, aside from projecting your politics onto it.
Because what Isayama is promoting and supporting are final-like solutions.
Writing something in fiction does not mean you support that very thing. These are the people lecturing everyone else about media literacy. The jokes write themselves.
There are two final solutions in the manga. The first is Zeke's euthanization plan, and the second is Eren's rumbling, where Eren mass murders 80% of the world, but let's be real here, his true aim was to clean the world and kill everyone. The euthanization plan is much more complex because it has layers. The first layer is anti-Semitism, and I think the final arc operates as both anti-Semitic and fascist.
Again, this is where the key disconnect is, where his brain just fails to comprehend something. The arc showing fascism and showing something like anti-Semitism does not mean that it is fascist or anti-Semitic. And for someone to bitch and complain, especially when that kind of behavior is condemned in the story by characters. If the story itself was promoting fascism and promoting anti-Semitism, in other words, didactic storytelling by saying this is right, this is good, if the story was written that way, I don't think these things would be portrayed in the horrific way that they are. If Isayama is trying to promote these things as good, as what's needed, as what's best, the story would not be showing the destruction, trauma, and consequences of these beliefs, of these kinds of actions.
It can be both, and the reason why I say it's anti-Semitic is because the Eldian and Marley are interned much like the Jews in the Second World War, and they are seen and labeled as the devils, or monsters with tainted blood. And these are the same terms the Nazis used when they othered the Jews. But layered above this self-guilt is inner hatred, because the Marleyan state kept promoting a politics of fear and forced every generation of Eldians to shoulder the sins of their father. What is even more twisted is that the ruler of Marley turns out to be an Eldian, who has been using interned Eldians to wage war and expand the empire of Marley. Furthermore, this leader is also a symbol of anti-Semitism because he hates his blood and his people. So Zeke, the Wonder Child. But before he was the Wonder Child, he was a failure, and his father was a total dick. The pressure, the hatred, the fear, and the knowledge of what his father was up to spurred Zeke to snitch and devise a plan of euthanization. This plan stemmed from a janitor who threw piss water on his family and told them to never breed, and questioned why Eldians even breed. And so Zeke, a child of royal blood, understands that he could activate the founder and command it to destroy Eldia and the future of its people. Although this does not happen, the eugenics plan is never condemned, but rather framed as a saving grace, a gift. Now, this is also framed as the weaker position, because Zeke is refusing to fight, and the reason why I say Attack on Titan can be read as both is because of Eren and the Jaegerists, who are clearly fascists. However, eugenics? That's a plan that's often connected to white supremacists, fascists, Nazis. That's what they desire. It's a form of ethnic cleansing. In the past, white people have used eugenics to wipe out African Americans, indigenous people, and Jewish people. So it's a plan that's synonymous and deeply linked to the far right.
You serious? Yet another half-truth, and quite a severe one at that. The racial hierarchy pseudoscience that spurred on eugenics is not something exclusive to the far right. In fact, it was tied to the hip to progressivism, which is widely known and associated with the left wing. It was used to argue that black people were less intelligent and more subservient to justify racism and slavery, and those kinds of ideas continued on into the 19th and early 20th century, specifically in parts of the progressive movement. And they supported eugenic or a scientific way to improve public health and, oddly enough, reduce poverty. Fabian socialists expressed eugenic ideas in some of their writings. Scandinavian social democrats, and even Marxist influence thinkers who saw that coming. So let's not sit here and pretend that it's synonymous and deeply linked with the far right, just because the Nazis used it when Democrats, socialists, and progressives were the ones behind it prior to that. Where do you think the Nazis got it from? While they're widely considered far right, the Nazis were fascist, and fascism got a lot of its ideas from the left. Not just the racial hierarchy ideas, but also the anti-individualism and putting the state above all.
And since it is, it makes me question to why Isayama chose it. It's very questionable.
It's very questionable why a story with themes of war, racial discrimination, and radicalism would also include eugenics. That is so bizarre. I wonder what the connection could possibly be. You know that meme that says that leftists pretend not to understand something, thus making conversation next to impossible? I think that's what's going on here. And if that's not what's going on here, why is this guy lecturing other people on media literacy?
And there's different angles where you could read it, but it's a disgusting solution for such a huge problem. And, you know, Isayama, if I was your editor, I would be like, man, we really want to do eugenics? You know, that's some history. There are some people, there's some readers out there who face this and still face it, you know? Like, fuck this.
Your argument here boils down to, well, it might offend some people, so we shouldn't include it. And that kind of logic is partly why there's so much censorship online, because it might offend somebody. It's used to control what stories can be told, what can and can't be in stories, what kind of jokes can be told, and used to justify going back and removing things from media. It's actually very similar to the same kinds of things that the Soviet Union and other totalitarian governments would do. They would control things on a social level, what things could be said, what things could be shown, what kind of music can be played, what themes are in the music, and they would limit people's ability to express themselves. And people like Lost Futures, they want to silence ideas that they don't like, or perspectives that they don't like, are trying to do the same thing, doing so under a repackaged guise of empathy, because someone might be offended. And before anyone tries to draw a comparison to the book bannings that have happened in children's libraries, freedom of expression does not mean you get to push sexuality and show pornography to kids. Not the same thing at all. And to take this even further after what you just said earlier, I think the problem is you and people like you cannot look past a surface level. You see something depicting fascism and you think, oh, it must be advocating for it. People like you are the same ones that bitch about Helldivers and the Warhammer 40k universe, and use that same excuse of this might offend somebody to try and change those kinds of IPs. Attack on Titan shows its harms and consequences, but if portraying it equals endorsement and we shouldn't portray it because it might offend somebody, that means we couldn't tell critical stories about harmful ideologies at all. And considering that you said that eugenics is still going on, one would think that we should tell stories that shows the harm that it brings. We should talk about it when we can, including in our art, but apparently not. You know, I used to think that gatekeeping was ridiculous. I used to find it absurd. For the longest, I never understood why people gatekept. Until I came across people like Lost Futures. Until I started seeing the pattern where people like this enter a community or a creative project, and it all goes to shit. Based on that exact mentality.
On the other hand, Eren Yeager's plan is one that famous YouTuber FD Signifier attributes with doomerism and nihilism. That the only way to solve the problem is to destroy the world and start over.
I want you to remember him bringing up doomerism and nihilism, because I'm going to circle back to that later. There's a little bit more to that.
Although FD Signifier's point stands, and I'm hoping to see what arrives in his second part of nihilism, doomerism, I see the rumbling as a fascist final solution, where for Eren, the only way to remove those who hate Eldians on Paradise Island is to kill them all. To Eren, the people on the continent are not human beings, but animals who deserve to be trampled on.
But that's a half-truth. While Eren did say that, he also went on to say the opposite of that. When he went across the sea to Marley, and particularly Liberio, and he slept under his enemy's roof, and he ate the same food as they did, he realized that he wasn't that different from them. That's the entire point of his conversation with Reiner, and that conversation with Reiner was after his conversation with Flock. Now one could argue that because Eren repeated what he said to Flock later on during the rumbling, which is after his conversation with Reiner, that he didn't really mean it. But I think what's clear as day, to anyone who honestly reads the series, and in particular the last arc, is that Eren is conflicted. On one hand, he wants to view these people as animals deserving of it, as lesser than him so that he can rationalize why he's doing it. He's trying to psych himself up. That's why he thinks back to his mother and he gets those flashes of memory back to that day when Marley's spies attacked the walls at Paradise. But on the other hand, he apologizes to his future victims profusely. He breaks down crying at the thought of everything. He wishes things could be different.
Eren, in my reading, is like Adolf Hitler. Firstly, Hitler believed in a dog-eat-dog world. A kill or be killed world.
Eren acknowledging a fact about life, and Hitler having acknowledged that same fact about life, is not the gotcha you think it is. Hitler also breathed oxygen and drank water, the same water that we drink. That's pretty much your argument. You can take one look at human history, or even excluding humanity, you can take a look at nature aside from humanity and see that life is a dog-eat-dog world. Resources are limited. Access to resources are limited. Not everyone can have everything. Time is limited. Even ants wage war over resources. And while humans are more complex than ants, we get dumber and dumber when we are in groups. Because we are animals, we have instincts. We rely on those instincts even more. And not only are we willing to fight over resources because those resources are limited, but we're also willing to fight over opinions because we can have those. In fact, life is such a dog-eat-dog world that if people are starving to death, they will resort to cannibalism to survive. They will eat other people to survive. And sure, that's an extreme, but that does reflect that truth.
He also had thoughts on the weak and the fate that they deserved. Hitler also believed that those who were not Aryan all deserved to be cleansed off the face of the earth. Of course, this cleansing began with the Jews, but there were others. And in Mein Kampf, Hitler states his desire to clean all who were not pure Aryans.
I've already explained why this comparison is flawed. Eren and the Jaegerists were not racial supremacists. They did not view all Eldians good and all non-Eldians bad. They did have a view of outsiders, yes, and that's the nationalist element, but they were not Eldian supremacists. Which, fun fact, is partly tied to our instincts. Because of our tribalism, those considered outside of our tribe, whatever tribe that may be, we are more distrusting of, while we are more trusting of those in the tribe. Their rationalization for the rumbling was not, these people aren't Eldian, therefore they are inferior, and we have every right to kill them off and wipe them off the face of the earth. But rather, these people pose a threat to us, these people are rallying against us, they pose a threat to us, we need to kill them before they kill us. And that came from the oppression they've faced, due to Marley and those who worked with Marley. That doesn't make it good, that doesn't make it true, that doesn't justify the genocide whatsoever. But pretending that there's no difference in their reasoning is dishonest.
But also, all who are useless is society. If you read Attack on Titan, there is an attack on the weak, on those who are useless, those who do not fight. And I think this is linked to the rhetoric that Hitler used.
The panels that you show of Eren crying and expressing anguish are not because he feels useless or weak to society. He's called himself weak and blamed himself for his mother's death because he couldn't do anything to stop it. He's done the same thing for his friends when they've died or been in tense situations, and he's also felt powerless in the face of the Titans. That is not the same thing as feeling weak or useless to society. In fact, the first panel this guy shows where it says, is because humans are weak, is crying the only thing the weak can do? Is Eren crying about his mom in the intense situation of the attack that just happened on Paradise from the Marleyan spies? He cut out the top part of the panel where Eren says, Mom's gone. I'm never going to see her again. Why is this happening to us? And then there's the part right below that he showed in his video. And the other panel, the context of that is extremely obvious, and you can see that Eren's friends are running on the ground, and Titans are attacking them and eating one of his comrades. You are reframing the panels that you're referring to so that you can reach to this fascist rhetoric and say it's the same. You outright ignore the context of those panels, of those scenes, so that you can validate what you're saying. That is literal confirmation bias.
But going back, right, tying this back, the mass murder or genocide Eren commits resembles the final solutions these fascists devise. It's like reading a nightmare, and if you're sane, there's no way Eren is in the right. However, it is in this orgy of death and violence that readers will see the ideal freedom that Isayama desires.
That Isayama desires, not Eren, but the author. So we're conflating the opinions of the character with the opinions of the author. You know, that sure is an interesting take, and I would maybe entertain it if it weren't for the fact that at the end, after everything is said and done, right when Eren's about to die, he admits to Armin that he is a slave to freedom, that the entire time he has not been free, that he has been a slave to this predetermined path, which completely riffs on Eren's idea of freedom. But that's totally, surely, what Isayama wants. If Eren justifying it under the guise of freedom means that Isayama wants genocide for his freedom, but then Eren proceeds to say that he is a slave of freedom, wouldn't that mean Eren saying after the fact that he's a slave to freedom mean Isayama doesn't want that? And that's me being consistent with your bizarre logic.
And it is a freedom that stems with the mass killing of those who pose a threat and hate the Eldians. This freedom is tied to having supreme power and crushing any life with the boot. Right-wing readers all claim that this manga is about freedom and liberty, but this type of freedom is disgusting. It is a freedom from responsibility, a freedom to kill any who oppose you, to kill any who despise you, to kill and kill without any recourse. This fascist freedom is absolutely disgusting, and the fact to Isayama true or pure freedom can only come from supreme power only highlights my point that this is a fascistic piece of propaganda.
And the fact to Isayama true or pure freedom can only come from supreme power only highlights his point that it's a fascistic piece of propaganda. You know, except for the fact that Eren admits in the end he had no free will, that he was a slave to freedom, failed to change anything, and is an idiot. Meaning the very supreme power that this guy claims is what Isayama thinks is freedom, the power of the Titans, which allows the knowledge of the future, is what imprisoned Eren in a delusion of freedom.
Now here's a bombshell. In my research, I ran into a manga called Showa, and in it the legendary mangaka Shigeru Mizuki draws a panel of Japanese troops trampling on Korean soil. And the mangaka writes, "Oh, the Koreans have been trampled on time and time again." I think this entire manga, Attack on Titans, is actually centered on Japan. And what we're reading here is Ishiyama's fear that the Koreans and the Chinese will one day retaliate for the crimes that Japan has committed against them. And so Ishiyama is showing the Japanese a solution, that they should and can remilitarize and cause a rumbling to trample on those that hate them.
Right. Because having characters call out the crimes against humanity involved in that, and showing the horrors, definitely doesn't contradict that. That the friends and foes of Eren, teaming up to stop him before he succeeds, with Eren confessing he was a slave, is surely meant to inspire the Japanese to destroy the rest of the world. Because nothing is more inspiring to a cause than a man pathetically crying as he admits his entire life was a lie. You see, if you ignore the dozens and dozens of plot details contradicting you, along with the author's own words, I could see why you see it that way.
If you've watched or listened up to this point, you may be asking, why does EJ care so much? Why should I care so much? There are those that claim that Attack on Titans is a manga or an anime about freedom and liberty, that it's about big, naked titans fighting against each other. But is it really? The reason why I care so much is because the online alt-right has taken a liking to Attack on Titan and have used the manga and anime to be edgier. This entire video is jumping off what Indiendo Studios began. One of the most prominent videos Indiendo created was how to radicalize a normie. And I and many others have began to notice that Attack on Titan also plays a part in this massive web that radicalizes normies in online spaces. And I think this is one method where a normal liberal reads Attack on Titan, which is and has fascist propaganda, and they go online because they're confused and they find the alt-right. The normie becomes radicalized.
Ah, yes, the classic alt-right pipeline. You know, for a guy who likes to talk about radicalism, you sure do have quite a few radical takes of your own. Setting that aside for a moment, this is almost a flat-out admission that you made this video because some people who have the politics you don't like Attack on Titan. And your desperate insistence that the story is fascist or has fascist propaganda is just the icing on the cake. You are likely more radicalized than the majority of any right-wing fan that likes Attack on Titan. He has several tweets where he admits to being a communist. So he's against one totalitarian genocidal belief system, while for a totalitarian genocidal belief system. And that's not necessarily shocking because when communists aren't victimizing themselves at every opportunity, they're constantly accusing anyone and everyone of being a fascist. And this guy is a perfect example of that. So far, he is embodying the stereotype. Sure, there are some crazies out there. There are some loonies. Crazy people are on all sides. But to perform the mental gymnastics you have done, just to damn near admit that you're doing this because your political opposition likes it, is more than enough to show that there's a bit of polarization and radicalization with you. You know, so many people want to talk about the alt-right pipeline, but no one wants to talk about the far-left pipeline. I find that a little strange, especially as we see more and more mass shooters from that side of things.
And throughout my research for this video, I've read hundreds of comments where Attack on Titan fans deny it is fascism or Japanism and try to rebuttal with, oh, it's just a silly manga. But there are others who cheer and support Eren's mass murder.
Okay, and? That's not a justification for you to contort the story. I have seen people from both sides of the aisle argue that Eren Yeager was right and defend the rumbling. From Twitter, Discord, and Instagram, I've seen pro-Palestine people with pronouns in their bio defending Eren and arguing that he was right because they were obviously projecting their politics and what side they're for onto Eren, thinking that if Palestine did something similar to their enemies, they would be justified in doing so. It all goes back to that bullshit mentality of the oppressed cannot oppress the oppressor, which is used to justify doing atrocious things in return by pointing to the atrocious things done to you or your side. That's why I showed the amount of clips and statements and beliefs from anti-racism and left-leaning black people when talking about white people and whiteness. It's that exact mentality that has them discriminating against white people and pretending as though they aren't. As though it's okay because discrimination towards them and their people has happened from white people. But despite me seeing people that I disagree with, like Attack on Titan, and view it from their perspective, defending Eren, I have yet to make a video bitching about Attack on Titan, blaming it for why those people agree with it, and contorting the story's material, plot lines, and events so that I can justify and accuse the story of trying to inspire those kinds of things.
Oh, and I forgot to mention this, but there was an Ottoman-like boy who was a refugee. The group meets them on their first visit to Marley, and when the rumbling occurs, we see it through his eyes. We see him and his brother get gruesomely crushed. For Eren, it was inevitable. This was fate, and how likely will this action against harmless and innocent refugees translate into the real world? We live in a world where young white men are believing in the Great Replacement theory.
And there it is. Like I said, far-left people tend to have a weird fixation with white men. Setting that aside for a moment, the Great Replacement theory propaganda from white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and white nationalists would not be as convincing to white men if it weren't for how leftists constantly talk about them and white people as a whole. You sit here and pretend like your radicalism doesn't inspire their radicalism, when your side, who claims to be against discrimination, often says discriminatory shit about them all over the place. Not only is racism towards white people just rampant and accepted within those spaces, having been in those spaces myself, but its existence is flat out denied by your crowd's mental gymnastics and wordplay, like some Orwellian monolith. Uh-oh, I made a comparison to Orwell. I must be a fascist. The fact that hate crimes towards white people are not taken seriously by your side, and they aren't covered as much. Hell, someone simply acknowledging racism towards white people will be met with accusations of racism, or they'll be accused of spreading Great Replacement theory propaganda. I've seen it firsthand in the art commentary space. The constant demonization, constant lecturing written in the media, and the constant false, illogical, nonsensical propaganda.
Come on, Billy, you gotta do it.
Debate team is not my thing, Benny.
What about you, Julie?
I got a soccer tournament and 3 papers to do.
Debbie? Come on, don't let me down, Debbie.
I don't think so, Penny Proud. I got a DJ gig. You can take your model minority myth somewhere else.
Model minority myth? What does that mean?
I think she just called you a racist, Penny.
Black people can't be racist. I agree. Racism is prejudice plus power. But we can be jerks. I give you that.
Either denying that white people are a race, an ethnicity, even denying that they have a culture.
What did I do wrong?
You have it better. You're offensive. Police lives matter?
You have the same sticker. We're just trying to do school.
What?
You guys have the same sticker of the other.
But this is our space.
We've got a Police Lives Matter sticker and we're getting kicked out. Can't do school. You just said we have to leave.
No, I said you're making the space uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable.
But you're white. Do you understand what a multicultural space? It means you're not being centered.
White's not a culture?
No. No, it's not a culture. White is not a culture. Say it again to the camera. You think whiteness is a culture?
This is insane.
So anyways, this is the violence that ASU does, and this is the type of people that they protect. Okay, this white man thinks he can take up our space, and this is why we need a multicultural space, because they think they can get away with this shit.
I'm gonna sit here the whole time, and you can find somebody to kick me.
That's cool. We will.
We're not kicking you out. We're asking you to leave if you have any consideration for people of color and or marginalized.
So clearly don't.
That I can go?
Yeah, the whole rest of the campus, the second floor, the first floor, the whole MU, every single part of the campus centers you. This is the only space that you're not centered, and you're still trying to center yourself, which is peak white cis male bullshit.
You're not.
You are racist. Your sticker is racist because police, that's a job. You can choose to be a police. I don't choose to be black. Okay? No, you can choose to be a cop. You can choose to kill people with a badge, and you're protecting that shit, which means that you're racist.
I wasn't trying to defend you guys.
I know, but this offends us automatically because these people kill people like me and like us, right? So you're promoting our murderers. So please just don't do that.
Thank you.
So why should that bother you?
Because, do you understand that Police Lives Matter was in response to Black Lives Matter?
I pay the same fucking tuition as you.
Yep.
Hold on, but
yeah, that's fine, and you have everywhere. You have.
I'm working 60 hours a week while going to school because my parents don't just give me money.
But it doesn't matter.
Or attacking their culture.
Maybe the reason why really crazy white people are believing that white culture is being erased, and whenever they're asked what white culture is being erased, they can't even really tell you what it is because white culture at its core is just control. Controlling anyone and everything, especially those who aren't white. Telling people what their lives are supposed to look like so that it keeps white people comfortable. Even if it harms others, as long as white people are comfortable, that's white culture. It's white control. So when the world starts to look more equal, and white people that never left their spot start to see other people that they've oppressed this entire time begin to rise up and have their own voice and their own place in the world rightfully, start to gain something, it feels like the white people are losing something. But all they're losing is control. That's it. They're not losing anything other than control over all the people that they've oppressed this entire time. That's it. It's not white culture, it's white control.
Making up absurd claims like white people created racism by using cherry-picked history, or making up issues like calling math or PBIS white supremacy to the most unironic, retarded, racist arguments when you think about it for more than 2 seconds, rather than just going along with it because so many are wannabe revolutionaries, desperate to be a part of something. The hypocrisy with whitewashing and blackwashing further showcases the double standards. You can almost always accurately guess the politics of those who defend blackwashing. It's racist to whitewash fictional characters and historical figures. But then those same people who claim to be against that will go on to blackwash fictional characters and even historical figures, real people who existed, and they'll defend that. Point is, your crowd's obsession with, and sanity over, and hypocrisy with white people gives white supremacists and nationalists the ammo to convince people of their narrative. Their narrative is bullshit, and your side of things gives their narrative more to work with to convince people. Both are true at the same time. And the longer you all refuse to introspectively examine that, will only add to that.
They've been shooting and killing Muslims, African Americans, and maybe trans people too.
Considering the most recent shootings, that did not age well.
There's also a discourse about the idea of the sins of the father. People think it's stupid that the aliens should carry guilt for the crimes their ancestors committed.
But it is stupid. Feeling guilt for something that you did not do yourself is stupid. Expecting or demanding someone to feel guilt for something that they are not guilty of is stupid. And it's emotional manipulation. It's one thing to have empathy and to feel bad for what someone has gone through. It's a completely separate thing to feel guilty for something you did not do. And someone trying to pressure you into feeling guilty for something that you did not do nor had a hand in is trying to manipulate you. We all know if you were accused of something you did not do, and someone demanded you feel guilty on that basis, despite the fact you didn't do it, you would have a problem with it. And you both know you'd have a problem and would be against, hopefully, if a black man were to be falsely accused of theft or rape and he did not do it. Would expecting him to feel guilty for something he did not do be fair or reasonable? No, it wouldn't. And on top of that, what we're discussing here is condemning people for actions they did not do, expecting them to feel guilty for actions they did not do, on the sole basis of their skin color, of their race. Because they were born in a particular group, they must be held accountable for the actions of those previously in that group. That is by definition racist, and it's unironically bordering on the same logic that racists use to condemn black people and other groups, while some of them commit these kind of crimes at this rate. So it's perfectly fine for us to treat all of them this way.
And when Eren crushes Marley, some of these readers have cheered and translated his actions as him being proud of his ancestors. This pride of crimes in justifying them bleeds into the real world.
It's almost like continuously putting people down and trying to hold them accountable for wrongs they did not commit just because they share the same skin color or lineage as those who committed those wrongs, and justifying your mistreatment to them or your belittlement and misdeeds to them based on the wrongs of others in their group that no longer exist can push them to the edge to become exactly what you say they are or worse. Again, it inspires opposition. It inspires spite. We've seen this with a variety of groups in conflict. Attack on Titan shows this form of radicalism too. After child Grisha is told the sins of his ancestors by his father, explaining why they're mistreated and why his sister died, he cried out that he nor Faye, his sister, did any of that all they did was go for a walk. He then grows up and joins the Eldian Restorationists, to which he professes that what his ancestors had done was right. There's also an entire panel where it's explained that because they kept projecting this idea of a devil, of the island devils, and they mistreated the Eldians again and again and again because the Eldians had previously mistreated them, they created the devil that they face in Eren and the Rumbling. This story acknowledges both facets, and what I'm really curious about is why you're bothered by the story acknowledging wronging people because their ancestors wronged your ancestors can lead them to wronging you and your side.
And all of this is critically linked to Japan's war crimes, but also the genocides the Americans and Canadians have committed. Hey Americans, you're sitting and living on stolen lands. Are you really proud of that?
First, notice how he just prior complained that people think it's stupid that the Eldians should carry guilt for the crimes of their ancestors, and then he proceeds to try and bring up the wrongs of past Americans and Canadians to ask if they're proud about it. He complained about it because he is the kind of person that expects people to feel guilt for their ancestors' actions. He is the kind of person that Attack on Titan shows the flaws with. Secondly, stolen land. If you champion diversity and don't believe in illegal immigrants, how is it stolen? They were simply bringing diversity. You can't believe borders aren't real and that it was stolen land. But what you really mean is conquered. That's not an excuse or a justification for the atrocities committed in that conquering, but it's a distinction. They lost. The indigenous groups waged war and fought one another over land, even claiming territory after they would win. So who should it go back to? From the indigenous the colonizers claimed it from, or the indigenous prior to them that they took it from? Now the typical excuse for that is to claim it was due to the colonizers, the evil white man, that they waged war with one another and claimed one another's land. But are we really supposed to believe that for thousands of years while the rest of the world waged war and claimed each other's land, they didn't? Prior to the colonizers, the Aztecs waged war and expanded their territory. They defeated neighboring city-states, oppressed them, and demanded tributes. Those conquered were expected to provide tribute specifically with food, gold, and labor, along with captives for rituals, and had to participate in their wars. So no, I don't buy for a second that all of the indigenous in America were peaceful tree huggers prior to the white man.
When I was in my master's, my friend featured an awesome article in his essay. It talked about how colonizers erase indigenous presence and settler crimes from history. It was called The Depths of the Pile, White Settler Tautologies and Pioneer Lies. I'd recommend you to check it out. To those who are claiming that they are not responsible or should be blamed for what their ancestors did, I think you all should really think about what part you are playing in this white settler colonial narrative and society. These narratives are originally created by settlers and are then passed on to the next generation. Each generation plays a part in escaping responsibility and denying guilt. But know this, each generation shoulders the sins of their father.
Or confirmation that he is the very kind of person Attack on Titan shows the flaws with. He feeds the very cycle he bitches about. And then when shown a mirror, demands that the mirror is flawed, rather than him.
And as Ludwig Porcel wrote in his kick-ass song, Sins of the Father.
The sins never die.
On the other hand, you have white supremacists who are justifying Eren's mass murder because the world is kill or be killed. It's dog eat dog. And this is exactly the same rhetoric mass shooters use. I think Isayama also has this wrong. Indigenous people in North America, African people, and even Jewish people after the Holocaust did not swamp the descendants with guilt.
Right, because the very small fraction of clips and screenshots I've shown and gathered myself don't show them doing exactly that. Okay, sure.
But with the choice to be better and to fix the wrongs that their ancestors have committed.
Except they can't, because it's not their wrongs to right. They can help if they want to, but this demand, this entitlement, this delusion that the sins of their fathers are on them is not the case. For someone who complains about the mentality and Attack on Titan, you sure do participate in it. This is a logic that no one should be arguing for, because everyone's ancestors have done wrong. That includes those who are black or indigenous and so on. So how do they begin to right the wrongs of their ancestors? Surely you aren't proposing that we apply this specific rule to some groups of people and not others. It's likely your ancestors also committed atrocities. So how have you gone about righting those wrongs? If you're going to preach it, you should practice it. So why don't you tell us all about that, about the sins of your ancestors and how you have righted them? But something tells me, I have this sneaking suspicion that you aren't going to be consistent in this. Because it's not about you actually believing that the sins of someone's fathers and their lineage is on them. Not for everyone at least, but for those you don't like.
For the indigenous people in Canada, this was the stolen land, the stolen culture, the death of language, the torture in residential or industrial schools. It was the death of children and animals. But more importantly, it is also acknowledgement and the desire for their children's future to be better because the settlers stole that future. I won't speak for Africa because the channel African Propaganda is way better, but the Jewish people, they wanted to be treated like human beings. They wanted the Holocaust to be recognized. Jewish people after the Second World War were stateless and wanted to live equally with the Europeans and gain everything they had lost. But Europe did not do that. Europe did not fight anti-Semitism, but instead created the settler colonial state that is Israel, a place where all the Jews can go and rid Europe and America of them. The creation of the fake state of Israel has anti-Semitic origins, and the Jews who went from being prosecuted went to being colonizers of Palestinians. They stole that land, and they have claimed it as their own. For the Japanese, yes, they may be militarily weak, and yes, they were kicked out of their colonies, but to deny the crimes they committed and to live without taking responsibility is problematic. They've only pinned the crimes on the state, but the citizens bought in and performed their roles in these crimes. Japan should not live in fear because of retaliation. If they do, it is because they haven't taken responsibility or acknowledged their wrongdoings.
Japan should acknowledge their wrongdoings. That's why I'm bitching about this Japanese author's story that contains the various crimes and actions that Japan did, and paints them horrifically, while also showing a very nuanced take on how people respond to discrimination and trauma.
For those on the right, you have to change your mindsets, because these crimes impact people and have long-standing material consequences. If the right and the state continue to deny these, there may be future crimes and acts of repression.
Yeah, it's almost like people like yourself lead to those acts of repression by continuously beating people down for shit that they didn't do, trying to pin the blame on them when they didn't do it. You have no self-awareness. You're telling other people that they need to change their mindset, while you're actually, unironically, proposing that people are to blame for things they did not do, and then talking about horrible things can come from repression.
What I'm stressing here is that people should not take pride in the crimes, nor should they be overwhelmed with guilt, but they should at least be better people and be aware that the crimes they have committed in the past have impacted people in the present, for the past is linked to the present.
But again, they were not the ones who committed those crimes.
So, why do I care? Why should you care? Why should we care? In his conclusion, Alberto Eco phrases this better than I can ever. But I won't quote him because I want to save my own words. I believe we should care about fascists or Japanism propaganda because it is our responsibility to fight fascism and uncover it wherever it festers. Because if we do not, there is a possibility that will radicalize young men. Although this is one text in the grand scheme of things, I think it's important for people to understand there are words that kill and have killed, that this text is part of an overall system that radicalizes young boys, and this one is very dangerous in my opinion, because it is almost commanding the reader to fight, to kill, and to gain freedom by getting rid of the opposition.
You say, as someone who talks about fighting your opposition and getting rid of them.
So leftists, we have to stand up and we have to fight this. We have to warn others of the words that kill, because enough have been killed. The least we could do is warn those who are falling into fascism and tell them that fascism is an illusion and that in reality it does not give the middle class or these young men what they desire, but it only serves the capitalists and the elite.
Except fascism is against capitalism because it's against a free market. But this ties back into the long-standing propaganda from the communists that keep trying to pin capitalism, which is something they despise, as one and the same as fascism, and that the two work side by side in tandem, and that to take down fascism, one must take down capitalism.
So I raise my hand and I say down with fascism, down with Japanism, down with white supremacy, and down with hate. And I hope we could head towards a brighter future where hatred does not rule over the hearts of men, women, and non-binary people.
I can't even pretend to be surprised. And that's pretty much the end of his video. He doesn't say anything else that's relevant. And now that I'm at the end, what's clear is that Lost Futures reads at surface level while putting on the appearance of deeper analysis. He sees fascist imagery, authoritarian characters, a military aesthetic, and he mistakes the subject for the message of the story, the depiction as advocacy, because he's so obviously radicalized into this ideology that presents a big bad fascist boogeyman of the do-gooder commies. Fascism, fascism everywhere, and they're fighting the good fight. They're the resistance. He's fighting it by calling it out, and because he's so desperate to see it and call it out, he sees it everywhere. And he'll jump through hoops and do backflips to get there. This is a frequent habit from communists and leftists online. Any story that has anything close to depicting a group that claims or acts as a resistance, and that group resorts to radical atrocities in their attempt to change the world, these people label conservative, if not fascist. Just back in December of last year, they said the same thing about My Hero Academia, because the murderous psychopaths who would mutate people into slave monsters didn't win in the end. And that's another anime Lost Futures has just so happened to bitch about. And it's because they associate themselves with any group that's going against the status quo, regardless of whether the status quo is actually moral or not, regardless of whether it's good or not. Anyone resisting, they align themselves with and view themselves as. I think subconsciously, they know that the story is warning about people like them, wolves in sheep's clothing who wrap themselves in the veil of victimhood. He doesn't dislike Attack on Titan because it's fascist, and that's evident from his cutting context, cherry-picking, and confirmation bias. No, he dislikes Attack on Titan for three main reasons I've boiled it down to. A, his political opposition likes it, so he sees it as an opportunity to whine. That's made clear from him constantly bringing that up. B, the story shows that blaming and shaming people for the sins of their ancestors, expecting them to pay for it because of how they were born, which they did not choose, perpetuates the cycle of violence and hatred that spurs on war. Something that Lost Futures has shown he's more than willing to do, which is why he took offense to it and complained about that. That using the sins of someone's ancestors, the discrimination from someone's ancestors, to excuse and justify you discriminating against them, also perpetuates the cycle, which, as I've shown through dozens of screenshots and clips, leftists also engage in that. C, it reflects the cycle of humanity, the repetition of history due to the nature of man, and that is the antithesis of his scope, what he and his ilk call nihilism and or doomerism. This tweet of his cements it. People often spout the line, history repeats itself, but things can change. The future is not static, and the brave students who are protesting, building encampments, and our fight, the already oppressive police state, will bring change. Fuck doomerism and fight for a free Palestine. He loathes and despises the acknowledgement that history repeats itself, calling it doomerism, and the why couldn't be any more obvious. He wants Palestine to be free, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, the fact that history repeats itself has an implication that could mean Palestine will end up in a similar position in the future. And that change is temporary, so any change that he could make to the world wouldn't last or be as impactful as he'd like. So he rejects it as doomerism in favor of something like One Piece, where the main character has a dream of creating a world of entire freedom and happiness. Attack on Titan is a reminder of the ugly truth he's running from in favor of an illusion he's desperately trying to maintain. So he lashes out at the story, calls it doomerism, and asserts it as fascist, which just so happens to be his ideology's sworn enemy. In conclusion, he had a point about radicalism, but not just about fascism. Far-left ideologies, communism included, must be combated too, because the possibility it will radicalize young people is not just evident with him, but with plenty of what we see taking place. He partakes in the very cycle and system he claims to be fighting. Those falling into communism and the rage against the machine slop while spouting the exact stuff from the machine and getting themselves in that same illusion. It does not care for the working class either. It is just as destructive as the fascists it claims to be against. And that's why they've been in this long blood feud. Deep down, they know that they're both totalitarian control-obsessed loons fighting over who gets to control and oppress everyone else. They just insist that they're so different because of minor differences like who and how they appeal to people, how they bullshit the masses into following them. Knowing people like this, I fully expect to be called fascist, a racist, a white supremacist, or one of the other many buzzwords for simply acknowledging and pointing out their flaws. They can't help it. They're socialized to do that by their spaces, like a crackhead twitching. Regardless, I wanted to point out the flaws with these nutjobs, reinterpreting Attack on Titan to virtue signal and pat themselves on the shoulders so they feel like they're actually contributing anything. These kinds of videos won't be the norm on my channel. I'm aware many of you watch to escape and have a laugh, and I hope that this video brings some nuance to the discussion. And what are your thoughts on all of this? Let me know down below.